The room fell silent as Lucas Reed stood from his seat, his calloused hands gripping the table's edge. Every eye in the glittering ballroom turned toward him, the man in the borrowed suit, the outsider who didn't belong. Across the stage, Evelyn Zhao, one of the most powerful CEOs in the world, stood frozen under the spotlight, her composure cracking as voices closed in around her. Lucas should have stayed quiet, should have stayed invisible. But sometimes staying silent isn't kindness, it's cowardice. And in that moment, watching them tear apart the woman who'd once saved his life without even knowing it, Lucas made a choice that would change everything. If you want to see how one father's courage shattered a room full of prejudice and transformed two outsiders into something extraordinary, stay with me until the end. And when you do, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The chandelier overhead cost more than Lucas Reed's truck, probably more than his entire year's salary at Morrison's Auto Repair, if he was being honest. He stood just inside the entrance of the Grandview Hotel's Imperial Ballroom, one hand resting protectively on his daughter Mia's shoulder, the other tugging at the collar of his borrowed suit. The fabric felt wrong against his skin, too stiff, too tight, like it was designed for someone else entirely. Which, of course, it was. "Dad, you're doing it again," Mia whispered, reaching up to still his fidgeting hand. At 8 years old, she already had more composure than he did. Her dark hair was pulled back in a careful braid, courtesy of their neighbor Mrs. Chen, and the navy dress she wore had been a gift from the same woman who'd somehow convinced Lucas that attending the Horizon Foundation's annual charity dinner was a good idea. "Sorry, kiddo," Lucas murmured, forcing his hand back to his side. "Just not used to all this." "All what?" He gestured vaguely at the room before them. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over circular tables draped in white linen. Each place setting featured more silverware than Lucas typically used in a week. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in gowns that probably cost more than his rent moved through the space with practiced ease, their laughter polite and measured, their conversations conducted in voices just loud enough to be heard, but never so loud as to be noticed. "This," he said simply. Mia squeezed his hand. "We belong here, Dad. Mrs. Chen said so. The foundation helps families like us, so we're supposed to be here." Lucas smiled down at his daughter, his heart doing that thing it always did when she tried to comfort him, expanding and breaking at the same time. She shouldn't have to reassure him. She was 8. But Mia had been forced to grow up faster than any child should, and sometimes Lucas forgot that the roles between them had blurred in ways he couldn't quite fix. "You're right," he said, straightening his shoulders. "We do belong here." The lie tasted bitter, but he kept his smile in place as they moved deeper into the ballroom. A few heads turned their direction, brief, assessing glances that took in his poorly fitting suit, Mia's off-the-rack dress, the work-roughened texture of his hands. Lucas had learned long ago to read those looks. The quick evaluation, the subtle dismissal, the way eyes would slide away after determining he wasn't worth the effort of introduction. He'd built calluses against that kind of judgment, thick enough that the looks barely registered anymore, or so he told himself. "Table 17, Mia read from their invitation, leading him through the maze of tables with the confidence of someone who'd never learned to feel small in crowded rooms. Lucas followed, grateful for her certainty, for the way she moved through the world like she owned it, even when the world seemed determined to teach her otherwise. They found their table near the back of the room, far from the stage where the evening speeches would take place. Their table mates hadn't arrived yet, leaving Lucas and Mia alone in a sea of empty chairs. He pulled one out for his daughter, making sure she was settled before taking his own seat. "This is nice," Mia said, running her fingers over the smooth tablecloth. "Everything's so pretty." "It is," Lucas agreed, though his attention had drifted to the stage at the front of the room. A podium stood ready, flanked by enormous screens that currently displayed the Horizon Foundation logo. A sunrise rendered in clean, minimalist lines. Behind it, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city skyline, buildings lit up against the gathering dusk. The Horizon Foundation had provided Mia's medical care 2 years ago, when Lucas's insurance had maxed out and the bills had started arriving like death sentences. They'd covered her treatment, paid for the specialist, made sure his daughter got the care she needed when Lucas's own options had run out. He owed them everything, which was why he'd accepted Mrs. Chen's invitation tonight, despite knowing he'd spend the entire evening feeling like an imposter. "Mr. Reed?" Lucas turned to find a young woman in a fitted black dress standing beside their table, clipboard in hand. Her smile was professional, practiced, but her eyes held genuine warmth. "Yes?" "I'm Sarah Kim, one of the Foundation's coordinators. I wanted to personally welcome you and Mia tonight." She crouched down to Mia's level, her smile widening. "You must be Mia. I've heard wonderful things about you." Mia beamed. "Really? Really? Your father wrote us the kindest letter about how the Foundation helped your family. It reminded all of us why we do this work." Lucas felt heat creep up his neck. He'd written that letter at 2 in the morning, exhausted and emotional after another long shift, trying to put into words what it meant to have strangers care about his daughter's survival. He hadn't expected anyone to actually read it, let alone remember it. "I meant every word," he said quietly. Sarah stood, her expression softening. "We know you did. That's why we wanted you both here tonight. You're part of our family now, Mr. Reed. We hope you feel welcome." She moved on before Lucas could respond, leaving him to process the unexpected kindness. Mia reached over and squeezed his hand again, and he squeezed back, grateful for the anchor of her small fingers against his. The ballroom continued to fill around them. Their table gradually acquired occupants, a middle-aged couple who introduced themselves as the Harrisons, donors who'd been supporting the Foundation for years, a young tech entrepreneur named Derek, who immediately launched into a monologue about his company's latest product, and an older woman named Patricia, who smiled at Mia and asked about school with the kind of genuine interest that made Lucas's chest ache. They were kind enough, these table mates, polite. But Lucas could feel the distance in their interactions, the way they'd offer him a smile before turning to someone else, someone more like them. It wasn't malicious, just automatic, the social calculus that happened without thought. He just started to relax, to accept his position as friendly observer rather than active participant, when the room's energy shifted. It was subtle at first. A change in the quality of conversation, voices dropping to whispers, heads turning toward the entrance. Lucas followed the collective gaze and saw her, Evelyn Zhao. He recognized her from the Foundation's promotional materials, from the brief research he'd done before tonight. CEO of Zenith Technologies, one of the youngest billionaires in the country, known for her innovative work in AI and her ruthless business practices. In the photos he'd seen, she'd seemed untouchable, polished and perfect in boardrooms and on magazine covers. In person, she looked terrified. She stood just inside the ballroom entrance, her posture rigid, her face carefully neutral. The black gown she wore was elegant and expensive, but it hung on her frame like armor. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, emphasizing the sharp angles of her face. But it was her eyes that caught Lucas's attention, dark and guarded, scanning the room with an expression he recognized intimately. The look of someone who knew they didn't belong, no matter what their bank account said. "That's Evelyn Zhao," Patricia whispered from across the table. "Brilliant woman, but so cold. I've been to 3 of these dinners, and she's never said more than 5 words to anyone." "Maybe she's just shy," Mia offered, her voice carrying in the sudden quiet. Derek laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Shy? She's worth $3 billion. You don't get there by being shy. You get there by being ruthless," Mrs. Harrison added, her tone suggesting this was common knowledge. "I've heard stories about the way she runs Zenith. No mercy for underperformers. All business, no heart." Lucas watched Evelyn cross the ballroom, her path to the VIP tables near the stage carefully plotted to minimize interaction. People stepped aside to let her pass, but nobody approached her. Nobody smiled. They just watched, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disdain, as if observing some exotic creature that might bite if provoked. She reached her table and sat down alone, her movements precise and controlled. Even from across the room, Lucas could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the edge of the table before she forced them into her lap. "She looks lonely," Mia said quietly. "She's not lonely, sweetie," Patricia corrected gently. "She's choosing to be apart. Some people prefer their own company." But Lucas wasn't so sure. He'd spent enough time on the outside to recognize the difference between choosing solitude and having it chosen for you. And everything about Evelyn Zhao's body language, the rigid posture, the guarded expression, The way she seemed to fold into herself despite taking up space at the most prominent table in the room spoke of someone who'd learned to protect herself from a world that had decided she didn't fit. "I'm going to say hi," Mia announced suddenly, pushing back her chair. Lucas's hand shot out, catching her wrist gently. "Mia, wait." "Why? She's all alone. That's not nice." Lucas struggled to find the words. "How did you explain to an 8-year-old that the world had rules about who could approach whom? That billionaire CEOs and mechanics' daughters occupied different universes that weren't supposed to intersect? She might want to be alone, kiddo. We should respect that." Mia's expression turned stubborn, the same look she got when she decided something was right and no amount of adult logic would change her mind. "If she wants to be alone, she can tell me. But maybe nobody's ever asked if she's okay. Maybe she's waiting for someone to be nice." Before Lucas could stop her, she slipped from his grasp and started weaving between tables toward the front of the room. His heart jumped into his throat. Around their table, conversation had stopped, everyone watching his daughter's progress with expressions ranging from amusement to horror. "Should you?" Patricia began. Lucas was already moving. He followed Mia's path through the ballroom, acutely aware of the eyes tracking them both. The room had gone quiet again, that particular silence that comes when everyone's pretending not to watch something they're absolutely watching. Lucas's face burned, but he kept his focus on his daughter, on making sure she didn't. Mia reached Evelyn's table and stopped, waiting politely to be acknowledged. Evelyn looked up, clearly startled, her expression cycling through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been panic before settling back into neutral. "Hi," Mia said brightly. "I'm Mia Reed. You looked lonely, so I thought I'd come say hello." Lucas reached them just in time to hear Evelyn's response, or rather, her lack of response. She stared at Mia, her mouth opening slightly as if to speak, but no words emerged. Up close, Lucas could see the fine tremor in her hands, the way her breathing had gone shallow. She wasn't being cold or aloof. She was completely overwhelmed. "I'm sorry," Lucas said quickly, placing a hand on Mia's shoulder. "My daughter didn't mean to intrude. We'll leave you—" "Do you speak English?" Mia interrupted, her head tilting with innocent curiosity. "Mrs. Chen says sometimes when people don't talk, it's because they speak a different language. She taught me some Mandarin. Ni hao." Something flickered across Evelyn's face. Surprise, definitely, but also something softer. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear, carrying the faintest accent. "I speak English, and your Mandarin is very good." Mia beamed. "Thank you. Mrs. Chen is teaching me. She's from Beijing. Where are you from?" "Mia," Lucas said gently, embarrassment flooding through him. "That's not— You can't just—" But Evelyn was looking at his daughter with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Shanghai, originally. But I've lived in America for many years." "That's so cool. I've never been to China, but I want to go someday. Mrs. Chen shows me pictures. It looks beautiful." Mia paused, then added with perfect 8-year-old logic. "You should come sit with us. Our table has extra chairs, and it's not nice to sit alone at parties." Lucas wanted the floor to open up and swallow him. "Mia, Miss Zhao probably has people she needs to. She can't just—" "Why not?" Mia looked genuinely confused. "She's by herself. We have room. Dad always says the best part of dinner is sharing it with friends." "We're not—" Lucas stopped, aware that anything he said would only make this worse. He looked at Evelyn, ready to apologize again, to gather his daughter and retreat before he made any more of a spectacle than he already had. But Evelyn was still looking at Mia, and for the first time since she'd entered the ballroom, her expression had softened into something almost like wonder. "That's very kind of you," she said quietly, "but I have to stay here for the speeches. I have to speak tonight." "Oh." Mia's face fell with such genuine disappointment that even Lucas felt it. "Okay, maybe after the speeches then." Evelyn's mouth curved into what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Maybe." "I'll hold you to that," Mia said seriously, as if sealing a business deal. Then she looked up at Lucas. "Dad, can we stay and talk for just a minute? Please?" Every instinct Lucas had screamed at him to decline, to get them both back to their table before they caused any more disruption. But Mia was looking at him with those eyes that had convinced him to let her get a hamster despite their apartment's no pets policy. And Evelyn was still wearing that expression of surprised vulnerability, and somehow Lucas found himself nodding. Just a minute, he agreed. Mia immediately launched into an explanation of why she liked the Horizon Foundation. They have really good coloring books in the waiting room, and they helped me when I was sick. Her words tumbling over each other in her excitement. Evelyn listened with an attention that seemed both careful and complete, as if Mia's rambling description of coloring books was the most important information she'd heard all day. Lucas stayed quiet, hyper-aware of the weight of the room's attention on them. He could feel the stares, could practically hear the whispers starting up again. The mechanic and his daughter, bothering Evelyn Zhao. The nerve. The presumption. But something kept him rooted in place. Maybe it was the way Evelyn's shoulders had gradually dropped from around her ears as Mia talked. Maybe it was the soft quality her expression had taken on, the guardedness easing into something more human. Or maybe it was the way she glanced at him occasionally, as if checking whether he was going to pull his daughter away and end this strange, fragile moment. And Dad says I can learn Japanese next, but Mrs. Chen says I should finish Mandarin first because otherwise I'll mix them up, Mia was saying. Do you know Japanese? Evelyn's gaze shifted to Lucas, a question in her eyes. He managed a small smile. She's obsessed with languages, he explained. Apparently 8 years old is the perfect time to become a polyglot. Actually, it is, Evelyn said, and Lucas could hear the businesswoman beneath the quiet voice. Precise, informed, certain. Children's brains are more plastic at that age. They form language pathways more easily than adults. See, Dad? I told you. Mia looked triumphant. Despite everything, the uncomfortable situation, the watching crowd, the complete absurdity of standing at Evelyn Zhao's table making small talk about linguistics, Lucas felt himself smile. A real one this time. Looks like you two are on the same side, he said. Learning languages is wonderful, Evelyn said, and now she was looking at him directly, her dark eyes meeting his. It opens doors, creates understanding between different worlds. There was something in the way she said it, a weight that suggested she wasn't just talking about vocabulary and grammar. Lucas found himself nodding, even though he wasn't entirely sure what she meant. That's what Mrs. Chen says, Mia agreed. She says words are bridges. They are. Evelyn's voice had gone softer. Sometimes they're the only bridges we have. A chime sounded through the ballroom. 3 clear notes that Lucas recognized as the warning that the program was about to begin. Around them, people started moving back to their tables, conversations wrapping up, the pleasant chaos of social hour condensing into organized anticipation. We should go, Lucas said, finally finding his voice. Let you prepare for your speech. Mia, say goodbye. But Mia was looking at Evelyn with that serious expression she got sometimes, the one that made her seem much older than 8. You're going to do great, she said firmly, and I'll be cheering for you. Something passed over Evelyn's face, emotion too quick for Lucas to name. She nodded once, sharp and decisive. Thank you, Mia. That means more than you know. Mia smiled, satisfied, then grabbed Lucas's hand. Come on, Dad. We don't want to miss anything. Lucas let himself be pulled away, but not before catching Evelyn's eye one more time. He meant to offer a polite nod, a silent apology for the intrusion, but what came out instead was something else entirely. She's right, you know, he said. You're going to do great. Evelyn's eyebrows lifted slightly, surprise flickering across her features. For a moment, they just looked at each other, 2 outsiders in a room full of people who belonged, recognizing something in each other that didn't need words. Then Mia tugged harder on his hand, and Lucas let himself be led back through the tables toward their seats. The walk felt longer this time, the weight of attention heavier. He could hear the whispers starting up again, could see people leaning toward each other, hands cupped near mouths to hide words that probably weren't kind. That was nice, Mia announced as they reached their table. She climbed back into her seat with the satisfaction of a mission accomplished. She seems really nice once you talk to her. Patricia was looking at them with an expression somewhere between shock and intrigue. Did you actually speak with her? She's really smart, Mia said, completely missing the subtext. And she knows about language stuff. She said I should keep learning. Derek was staring at Lucas with naked curiosity. How did you... nobody talks to her. How did you get her to actually engage? We didn't do anything, Lucas said, settling back into his chair and trying to ignore the heat in his face. Mia wanted to say hello, so we did. Just like that? Mrs. Harrison's tone suggested she didn't quite believe it. She just talked to you? She's a person, Mia said, her voice taking on that stubborn edge. People talk when you're nice to them. The adults exchanged glances, amused, skeptical, something else Lucas couldn't name. He was saved from further questioning by the lights dimming, the room settling into expectant silence as a man in a perfect tuxedo took the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Horizon Foundation's annual charity dinner. The program had begun. Lucas tried to focus on the speeches, the foundation director talking about their mission, a young woman sharing her story of survival, a major donor announcing a matching grant. But his attention kept drifting to the VIP table, to where Evelyn sat alone, her posture rigid again, that carefully neutral expression back in place. She looked small up there, despite sitting at the place of honor. Small and isolated, surrounded by empty chairs that should have been filled with colleagues or friends, but instead stood as monuments to her solitude. "Dad?" Mia whispered, leaning against his arm. "Why doesn't anyone sit with her?" Lucas didn't have a good answer. He watched Evelyn stare at the stage, her hands folded in her lap, her expression revealing nothing. Around the room, other tables were clustered tight with conversation and connection, but Evelyn's table remained empty except for her solitary figure. "I don't know, kiddo," he whispered back. "Sometimes people make assumptions about each other, decide things without really knowing." "That's dumb." "Yeah," Lucas agreed quietly. "It really is." The foundation director was wrapping up, beginning the introduction that Lucas recognized from the program notes as leading into Evelyn's speech. He felt his chest tighten with unexpected anxiety, as if he had some stake in how this played out. "And now," the director said, his voice warm with professional enthusiasm, "I'm honored to introduce someone whose generosity has transformed countless lives. Evelyn Zhao, CEO of Zenith Technologies, has been a cornerstone supporter of the Horizon Foundation for 5 years. Her contributions have funded medical care for hundreds of families, provided educational resources for underserved communities, and helped us expand our reach across the country." Polite applause rippled through the room, the kind of response that was expected rather than enthusiastic. Lucas clapped harder, earning a surprised glance from Derek. "Ms. Zhao has asked to say a few words about why she supports our mission. Please join me in welcoming Evelyn Zhao." The applause continued as Evelyn rose from her seat, her movements careful and controlled. She climbed the 3 steps to the stage with the precision of someone who'd practiced the route in her mind, making sure not to trip, not to falter, not to give the watching crowd any ammunition. Lucas's hand stilled as she reached the podium, as the lights found her, and she became fully visible to the entire ballroom. From his seat near the back, he could see what the closer tables might miss, the way her fingers gripped the podium's edge, the slight tremor in her shoulders, the careful breath she took before looking up at the crowd. She was terrified. "Good evening," Evelyn said, her voice carrying through the sound system but sounding smaller somehow, less certain than it had when she'd been talking to Mia. "Thank you for that kind introduction." She paused, and Lucas could see her struggling, could see the words getting stuck somewhere between thought and speech. The silence stretched just a beat too long, crossed from dramatic pause into uncomfortable territory. "I wanted to talk tonight about..." Another pause, longer this time. "About why I support the Horizon Foundation's work." Her prepared speech. Lucas could hear it in the formal phrasing, could see it in the way her eyes dropped to notes he couldn't see but knew must be there. This was supposed to be simple. Read the statement, smile for the cameras, return to her seat. Standard charity dinner protocol. But something was wrong. Evelyn's hands were shaking visibly now, her breathing audible through the microphone. She looked up at the crowd, and Lucas watched something crumble in her expression, watched the prepared words die before they could form. She stopped, started again. "When I first came to this country..." "Speak up," someone called from the middle of the room. Laughter followed, not quite cruel, but not quite kind either. Evelyn flinched. Her hands tightened on the podium until her knuckles went white. "I apologize," she said, her voice actually quieter now. I don't usually speak at these events." "We noticed!" Another voice, another ripple of laughter. Lucas felt Mia stiffen beside him. He put a hand on her shoulder, both comfort and restraint, unsure what she might do, but knowing his daughter well enough to recognize the signs of her getting ready to defend someone. Maybe if she spent less time counting her money and more time engaging with the community, she'd be better at this. Someone at the next table muttered, just loud enough to carry. More laughter. Knowing, mean. On stage, Evelyn seemed to shrink into herself. Her prepared speech was falling apart, her composure cracking under the weight of an audience that had decided she was fair game. Lucas watched her struggle, watched her try to pull herself back together, and felt something ignite in his chest. Anger. Hot and immediate and completely inappropriate for the moment. But beneath it, something else. Recognition. Because he knew what it felt like to be dismissed, to have a room full of people decide you weren't worth their time or patience. He knew what it felt like to stand in front of judgment and have your words fail you. "This is painful," Derek whispered, not bothering to hide his amusement. "Someone should put her out of her misery." "She's trying," Mrs. Harrison said, but even her sympathy sounded patronizing. "She's just so awkward. You'd think with all that money she could hire a speech coach." "Maybe she doesn't think she needs one," Patricia offered. "You know how these tech people are. All brilliance, no social skills." They were talking about her like she wasn't standing right there, visible and vulnerable and barely holding on. They were talking about her the way people talked about Lucas sometimes, with casual dismissal disguised as observation, judgment wrapped in politeness. On stage, Evelyn tried again. "What I wanted to say is that the foundation's work matters because it looks good on your company's PR reports." A man's voice, sharper than the others, not laughing anymore. The mood in the room shifted. The laughter died down, replaced by a different kind of attention. Hostile now, or getting there. Lucas looked toward the voice and saw a middle-aged man standing at one of the VIP tables, his expression righteous and his posture aggressive. "Richard, please," the foundation director said from his seat near the stage, his voice strained. "This isn't the time." "No, I think it is the time," Richard continued, his voice carrying easily across the suddenly silent ballroom. "We're all sitting here pretending like Misjudged's contributions are purely altruistic, but let's be honest. Zenith Technologies has been in the news lately for some pretty questionable labor practices. Outsourcing jobs, automating positions, leaving American workers in the lurch. Is this charity dinner just another tax write-off? Another way to clean up your company's image?" Evelyn stood frozen at the podium, her face pale, her earlier trembling replaced by absolute stillness. Lucas could see her shutting down, pulling into herself the way people did when the world became too much. "That's not fair," Mia whispered fiercely. "She didn't do anything wrong. She was just trying to talk." But fair didn't matter. The room had found its villain, and Richard wasn't finished. "I think we deserve some transparency," he continued, warming to his topic. "If we're celebrating your generosity, Ms. Zhao, perhaps you could explain how that generosity squares with the 1,000 jobs Zenith eliminated last quarter, or the reports of underpaid contract workers, or—" "Richard, that's enough." The director was standing now, his professional composure cracking into something more genuine, distress, maybe even anger. "This is completely inappropriate." "Is it? We're supposed to applaud her while she uses our charity as a shield? While she sits up there, too proud or too disconnected to even engage with the community she claims to support?" The ballroom erupted into murmurs. Some people nodded in agreement with Richard. Others looked uncomfortable, uncertain. But nobody was defending Evelyn. Nobody was standing up to say this was wrong, that attacking someone during what was supposed to be a celebration was cruel, regardless of your concerns about their business practices. Nobody except... Lucas felt Mia start to rise and saw her mouth opening to say something that would only make this worse for her, for both of them. He put his hand on her shoulder again, holding her gently in place. "It's okay," he whispered. "Let me." Then he stood up. The movement caught attention immediately. Heads turned toward the back of the room, toward the man in the ill-fitting suit who had no business inserting himself into a confrontation between donors and billionaires. Lucas felt every eye land on him, felt the weight of their judgment and their curiosity. He'd spent most of his life trying not to be noticed, trying to blend in, to not make waves, to accept his place in the order of things. Standing here now, about to speak up in front of all these people who'd already decided he didn't matter, went against every instinct of self-preservation he'd developed. But Evelyn was still standing at that podium, trapped and alone. And Lucas knew what it felt like to need someone, anyone, to say that you mattered. So he started walking. The ballroom was silent as he moved between tables, his footsteps echoing against the polished floor. Nobody tried to stop him. They just watched, their expressions cycling through surprise, confusion, and anticipation, wondering what the hell the nobody from table 17 thought he was doing. Lucas wondered the same thing, but he kept walking anyway. He reached the front of the room and stopped, positioning himself where he could see both Evelyn and Richard. Up close, he could see the tears she was fighting back, the way her breath had gone shallow and quick. She was looking at him with an expression that held equal parts confusion and panic, as if his presence here might somehow make everything worse. Maybe it would, but it couldn't make it much worse than it already was. Lucas turned to face Richard, to face the room, to face the hundreds of people who were about to hear a mechanic try to put words together in defense of a woman he'd met 10 minutes ago. "You want transparency?" he said, his voice carrying in the silence. "Okay, let me give you some." And then, in the language Evelyn had spoken first, in the words she'd learned before English ever became necessary, Lucas Reed began to speak Japanese. The shock rippled through the ballroom like a physical force. Faces went slack with surprise. Whispers erupted. Even Richard fell silent, his self-righteous momentum completely derailed by the complete impossibility of what was happening. But Lucas wasn't talking to them. He was talking to Evelyn, his words flowing in clean, fluent Japanese that he'd learned 12 years ago in Tokyo during the most important year of his life. "You don't know me," he said in Japanese, keeping his eyes on her stunned face. "But I know you, not personally, but I know what you've built. I know what Zenith Technologies created 5 years ago, the translation software that broke down language barriers for emergency medical services. The program that let a terrified American man communicate with Japanese doctors when his wife was dying, and he didn't have the words to save her." Evelyn's eyes widened, her hand coming up to cover her mouth. Lucas switched back to English, his voice stronger now, powered by something bigger than his own discomfort. "That software your company developed, the one you released for free to medical centers worldwide, it gave me the ability to tell doctors what my wife needed. It let me understand their questions, their instructions. It let me hold my wife's hand and tell her in real time what was happening, what they were doing to try to save her life." The ballroom was absolutely silent now. Even the whispers had stopped. "They couldn't save her," Lucas continued, his voice rough with old grief. "She died anyway. But because of your work, Ms. Zhao, because of what you built, my wife didn't die scared and confused in a foreign country where nobody understood her. She died knowing I was there, understanding what was happening, making choices about her care. She died with dignity because you cared enough to make technology that put humanity first." He looked around the room, meeting eyes that had dismissed him earlier, seeing recognition dawn in faces that hadn't bothered to learn his name. "You want to talk about her character?" Lucas said to Richard. "About whether her charity is real? I'm standing here because her work saved my life when I needed it most. Not for money, not for recognition. Her company didn't even put their name on the software prominently. I had to dig to figure out who'd made it possible. She did it because it was right, because she understood what it meant to be lost in translation." He turned back to Evelyn, switching to Japanese again. "Restraint isn't coldness. Difference isn't weakness. And just because someone doesn't perform emotion the way others expect doesn't mean they don't feel everything twice as deeply." Tears were streaming down Evelyn's face now, her composure completely shattered. But this breaking looked different from before. This looked like relief. Lucas switched back to English one final time, his words directed at the entire room. "My daughter understood something tonight that all of us adults forgot. She saw someone sitting alone and decided to offer friendship. No agenda, no judgment, just basic human kindness. Maybe instead of questioning Ms. Zhao's motives, we should be questioning our own. When did we decide that success meant someone didn't deserve compassion? When did we start measuring worth by how comfortable someone makes us feel instead of by what they've actually done? The silence that followed was different from before, heavier, weighted with something that might have been shame. Lucas looked at Evelyn one more time. You were trying to say why you support this foundation. I think I know why. Because you understand what it means to need help, to need understanding, to need someone to build a bridge when you don't have the words yourself. He stepped back, his heart hammering, his hands shaking with adrenaline. He just exposed himself in front of hundreds of strangers, had shared the worst moment of his life to defend a woman he barely knew. Every survival instinct he had was screaming at him to run, to get Mia and leave before anyone could process what had just happened. But before he could move, Evelyn stepped forward from the podium. She stood at the front of the stage, tears still on her face, and began to speak. Not in the halting, uncertain voice from before, in something stronger, more certain. Mr. Reed is correct, she said, her accent more pronounced now, but her words clear. About all of it. I'm not good at these events. I struggle with social performance, with knowing the right things to say, the right ways to engage. My mind works differently, processes differently, and I've spent my whole life being told that different means lesser. She looked out at the crowd, really looked at them for the first time. I support the Horizon Foundation because I know what it feels like to be the outsider, to be judged for things you cannot change, to have your worth measured by standards that were never designed with you in mind. This foundation sees people, really sees them, and provides help without requiring them to first prove they deserve it. Her voice grew steadier with each word, as if finding her truth had given her armor against the crowd's judgment. You're right to question corporate practices, she said to Richard. You're right to demand accountability. Zenith has made mistakes, and I've made mistakes. But don't confuse my difficulty with public speaking for lack of care. Don't mistake my restraint for absence of feeling. And don't assume that because I don't perform emotion the way you expect that I don't bleed the same as everyone else in this room. The ballroom remained silent, but the quality had shifted again. People were actually listening now, really listening. I came to this country alone, Evelyn continued. I built my company from nothing. I've succeeded in ways that sometimes surprise even me. But success didn't make me less lonely. Money didn't make it easier to connect. Every room I enter, I'm calculating, trying to figure out the social mathematics that everyone else seems to know instinctively, trying to translate not just languages, but entire ways of being. She looked at Lucas, her expression soft. Until tonight, when a child offered friendship without calculation and her father defended a stranger without agenda, I thought I'd accepted that isolation was just the price of being who I am. Thank you for reminding me that kindness still exists, that bridges can be built, that sometimes the outsiders find each other. The applause started slowly. Just one person at first, Mia, standing at their table in the back, clapping with fierce pride. Then Patricia joined her, then others. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was on its feet, the sound of clapping echoing off the high ceiling. But Lucas barely heard it. He was watching Evelyn, seeing the surprise and vulnerability and cautious hope in her expression, and thinking that maybe, just maybe, sometimes standing up was worth the cost of being seen. The applause filled the ballroom like a wave, crashing against the walls and ceiling before rolling back through the crowd. Lucas stood frozen at the front of the room, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. He hadn't planned any of this, hadn't prepared a speech or calculated the impact of his words. He'd simply stood up because staying silent felt impossible. And now hundreds of people were on their feet, clapping for something he still wasn't sure he understood. Evelyn remained on stage, her hands clasped in front of her, her face still wet with tears she'd stopped trying to hide. She was looking at him with an expression that made Lucas's chest tight, gratitude mixed with disbelief, as if she couldn't quite process that someone had spoken up for her without expectation of reward. The foundation director rushed to the podium, his professional smile back in place, but his eyes shining with genuine emotion. Well, he said into the microphone, his voice warm, I think we've all been reminded tonight why human connection is at the heart of everything we do. Thank you, Ms. Zhao, for your honesty and your continued support, and thank you, Mr. Reed, for showing us all what compassion looks like in action. More applause. Lucas felt his face burning as he made his way back toward his table, each step feeling impossibly long under the weight of all those eyes. People reached out as he passed, touching his arm, offering words he couldn't quite hear over the roaring in his ears. It was too much attention, too much acknowledgement, but he kept moving because Mia was waiting, and he needed to get back to something solid and real. He'd barely made it 3 tables away when a hand caught his elbow. Lucas turned to find Richard standing there, the same man who'd attacked Evelyn from across the room. Up close, he looked older than his voice had suggested, his face lined with stress and something that might have been shame. "I was out of line," Richard said quietly. His words meant only for Lucas. "I let my anger about corporate practices cloud my judgment. What I said to her, how I said it, that wasn't right." Lucas studied him for a moment, seeing genuine remorse in the man's expression. "Then maybe you should tell her that, not me." Richard nodded slowly. "I will. I just wanted you to know. What you did took courage. Standing up like that. A lot of people in this room were thinking someone should say something, but you actually did it." "I wasn't trying to be brave," Lucas said honestly. "I just couldn't watch anymore." "That's what makes it brave," Richard replied. Then he released Lucas's elbow and moved toward the stage, toward where Evelyn was being congratulated by the foundation director. Lucas finally reached his table to find Mia bouncing with barely contained excitement. She threw her arms around his waist the moment he was close enough, squeezing tight. "Dad, that was amazing! You spoke Japanese! I didn't know you could speak Japanese!" Lucas hugged her back, grounding himself in the familiar weight of his daughter. "There's a lot about your old dad you don't know yet, kiddo." "You made everyone listen," Mia said, pulling back to look up at him with eyes that shone with pride. "You made them understand." "I just told the truth," Lucas said, settling back into his chair and trying to ignore the continued attention from their table mates. Patricia was looking at him with undisguised fascination, Derek with calculation, the Harrisons with something approaching respect. "That was quite a revelation, Mr. Reed," Patricia said, her tone gentler than before. "About your wife. I'm so sorry for your loss." Lucas nodded, accepting the sympathy even as part of him wanted to deflect it. He rarely talked about Sarah, about those final weeks in Tokyo. The grief had scabbed over with time, but underneath it remained tender, and exposing it in front of all these strangers had left him feeling raw. "It was a long time ago," he said, which was true even if it didn't make the loss any less real. "Still," Patricia persisted, "what you did, defending Ms. Zhao like that, it was remarkable, especially given that you'd only just met her." "Mia met her," Lucas corrected, looking at his daughter with a small smile. "I just followed her lead." The program continued around them, but Lucas found it hard to focus. His mind kept replaying the last 20 minutes, analyzing every word he'd said, every reaction he'd seen. Part of him couldn't believe he'd actually stood up in front of all these people and exposed something so personal. Part of him couldn't believe it had worked, that his words had somehow cut through the hostility and made people actually listen. But mostly, he kept thinking about Evelyn's face when he'd spoken to her in Japanese. The shock, yes, but also the recognition. The way her expression had shifted from defensive isolation to something more open, more hopeful. As if his words had reminded her that connection was possible, even in rooms designed to keep her separate. The dinner service began, waiters appearing with practiced efficiency to deliver plates of food that Lucas barely tasted. Around the ballroom, conversation had resumed, but it felt different now. Softer somehow, less performative. He caught people glancing toward the VIP table where Evelyn sat, their expressions thoughtful rather than dismissive. Richard had made good on his promise, approaching Evelyn after her speech to offer what looked like a genuine apology. Lucas watched from across the room as they spoke, saw Evelyn's careful nod of acceptance, the way Richard's shoulders dropped with relief. It wasn't reconciliation exactly, but it was something, a crack in the wall that had surrounded her all evening. "Mr. Reed?" Lucas looked up to find Sarah Kim, the foundation coordinator from earlier, standing beside his chair. Her smile was warm, but there was something else in her expression, urgency maybe, or excitement. "Ms. Zhao would like to speak with you," she said. "If you have a moment?" Lucas glanced at Mia, who was halfway through her chicken and showing no signs of slowing down. "Can you stay here with Mrs. Harrison for a minute?" he asked. "Of course," Patricia said immediately. already shifting her chair closer to Mia's. We'll be fine. Go ahead. Lucas followed Sarah through the ballroom, aware once again of eyes tracking his movement. They wove between tables, past dessert stations being set up along the far wall, toward a quiet corner where Evelyn stood apart from the crowd. She'd composed herself since her speech, her tears dried and her expression calm. But Lucas could still see traces of vulnerability in the way she held herself. "Thank you for coming," Evelyn said as Sarah melted away, leaving them alone. Her voice was steady but quiet, that same careful control from earlier. "I wanted to speak with you privately." "You don't need to thank me," Lucas said quickly. "I didn't do anything special." "You did, though." Evelyn's dark eyes met his, intent and serious. "You stood up when no one else would. You shared something deeply personal to defend someone you'd just met. That's not nothing, Mr. Reed." "Lucas," he corrected. "And like I said before, my daughter understood something the rest of us forgot. She's the one who saw you sitting alone and decided that wasn't right." A small smile touched Evelyn's lips. "Mia is remarkable. You've raised her well." "I try," Lucas said, feeling that familiar mix of pride and inadequacy that came whenever someone complimented his parenting. "It's not always easy, doing it alone." "No," Evelyn agreed softly. "I imagine it isn't." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "The software you mentioned, the medical translation program, I didn't know it had been used that way. We created it because the data showed communication barriers were causing preventable deaths in emergency situations, but we never tracked individual cases. I had no idea it had touched your life so directly." "It saved me," Lucas said simply. "Maybe not my wife, but definitely me. Being able to understand what was happening, to communicate with the doctors, it gave me agency in a situation where I had none. That matters more than I can explain." Evelyn nodded, and Lucas saw her processing this information, filing it away in whatever mental systems she used to make sense of the world. "When you spoke to me in Japanese," she said, "it wasn't just the language. You understood the context, the cultural nuance. How long were you in Tokyo?" 14 months, Lucas replied. "My wife, Sarah, she was offered a teaching position at an international school. We thought it would be an adventure, a chance to experience something different before we settled down and had kids. We learned the language together, explored the city, fell in love with everything about it. And then she got sick. Stage 4 cancer. Ovarian. By the time we caught it, there wasn't much they could do." Lucas heard his own voice flatten, the way it always did when he talked about this part. Emotional distance as self-protection. "We stayed in Tokyo for treatment because the doctors there were doing innovative work, experimental protocols. It didn't matter in the end, but at least we tried everything." "I'm sorry," Evelyn said, and the words carried weight. Not the automatic sympathy of someone who felt obligated to express condolences, but genuine sorrow from someone who understood what it meant to lose something irreplaceable. "Thank you," Lucas said. "It was 7 years ago. Mia was just a baby. She doesn't remember her mother, which breaks my heart in a different way. But we manage. We've built a good life, just the two of us." They stood in silence for a moment, the ballroom noise a distant hum around them. Lucas found himself studying Evelyn more carefully now, seeing details he'd missed before. The exhaustion in her eyes that suggested sleep was something she rarely got enough of. The way her shoulders stayed tense even in this quieter moment, as if she couldn't quite allow herself to fully relax. The careful control of her expression, each emotion filtered and measured before being allowed to show. "Can I ask you something?" Evelyn said finally. "When you spoke earlier, you said restraint isn't coldness. That difference isn't weakness. How did you know that's what I needed to hear?" Lucas considered the question. "Because I've been the different one too. Not in the same ways as you, but I know what it feels like to walk into rooms where you don't fit, where people have already decided who you are based on what you look like, how you talk, what you do for a living. I'm a mechanic at a charity dinner full of millionaires. Trust me, I understand being judged for not performing the right way. But you spoke up anyway, even knowing they'd already dismissed you." "I spoke up because they dismissed you," Lucas corrected. "That's different. When it's about me, I can take it. I've got thick skin. But watching them go after you like that, watching you stand there alone," he shook his head. Someone needed to say it wasn't okay. I just happened to be the one standing closest. Evelyn's expression softened into something Lucas couldn't quite name. You know what the hardest part is? Not the judgment itself, but the loneliness that comes with it. Being successful doesn't make you less alone. Sometimes it makes you more alone because people assume you don't need anything, that you're too powerful or too rich or too self-sufficient to want basic human connection. But you do want it, Lucas said. It wasn't a question. I do, Evelyn admitted quietly. I want to walk into rooms and not have to calculate every interaction. I want to have conversations that don't feel like negotiations. I want... She stopped, seeming to realize she was revealing more than intended. You want what Mia offered, Lucas finished for her. Friendship without agenda. Yes, the word came out like relief. Exactly that. Before Lucas could respond, Mia appeared beside them, Patricia trailing apologetically behind her. I'm sorry, Patricia said. She insisted... It's fine, Lucas assured her, putting a hand on Mia's shoulder. What's up, kiddo? I wanted to make sure you were okay, Mia said, looking between her father and Evelyn with concern. You both look sad. Evelyn crouched down to Mia's level, a movement that seemed to surprise Patricia. We were talking about important things, she said gently. Sometimes important conversations look serious, but that doesn't always mean they're sad. Oh, Mia considered this. Like when Dad and I talk about Mom. It's serious, but not always sad. Lucas felt his heart clench. He tried so hard to keep his grief separate from Mia, to not burden her with the weight of loss she was too young to fully understand. But apparently she'd picked up more than he'd realized. Exactly like that, Evelyn said, her voice warm. You're very perceptive, Mia. Dad says I notice things other people miss. Mia looked up at Lucas. Are you done talking? Because dessert is coming and it looks really good. Despite everything, Lucas laughed. Yeah, we're done. Let's go get dessert. Would you? Evelyn started, then stopped, uncertainty crossing her face. Would you both like to join me at my table? I know it's unconventional, but I'd enjoy the company. Mia's face lit up. Really? Can we, Dad? Lucas looked at Evelyn, saw the hope and vulnerability in her expression, and knew what this invitation cost her. To ask for company in a room full of people who'd watched her stumble. To reach out to the mechanic and his daughter when surely she could have her pick of more influential companions. We'd be honored, Lucas said. They made their way to the VIP table, Mia chattering happily about the dessert options while Lucas tried to ignore the renewed attention their movement drew. Patricia had returned to their original table but was watching with undisguised interest. Derek looked calculating. Even the Harrisons were leaning together, whispering. Let them talk, Lucas thought. Let them wonder. For once, he didn't care what assumptions they made. The VIP table was larger than the others, designed to accommodate important guests and foundation leadership. But tonight it held only Evelyn, and now Lucas and Mia. They settled into chairs that probably cost more than Lucas's monthly rent, Mia bouncing with excitement while Evelyn watched her with an expression approaching fondness. Do you like chocolate? Mia asked as a waiter appeared with dessert, some elaborate confection involving mousse and gold leaf. I do, Evelyn said, though I don't often make time to enjoy it. You should make time, Mia said seriously. Life's too short not to eat good chocolate. Right, Dad? Your daughter is wise beyond her years, Evelyn said to Lucas. She gets it from her mother, Lucas replied, then felt the familiar ache at the mention. But it felt different this time, softer somehow, shared in the presence of someone who seemed to understand what loss meant. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the noise of the ballroom swirling around them, but feeling distant, separate. Lucas found himself relaxing incrementally, the tension that had gripped him since walking into the hotel finally starting to ease. Can I ask you about Japan? Evelyn said, looking at Lucas. You said you lived in Tokyo. What was it like? Lucas set down his fork, considering. Overwhelming at first. Everything was different, the language, the customs, the way people interacted. Sarah and I felt lost a lot in the beginning, but then we started to understand the patterns beneath the surface, the courtesy that looks like coldness until you recognize it as respect, the careful attention to detail that makes everything feel intentional. You loved it, Evelyn said, reading between his words. I did. Still do, in a way. Sometimes I think about going back, showing Mia where her mother taught, where we used to walk on weekends. But it's complicated. Grief makes geography strange. The places that held your happiness also hold your heartbreak. I understand that, Evelyn said quietly. I haven't been back to Shanghai in 5 years. My parents are there, my sister, but returning feels difficult, like I'd be acknowledging that I've changed too much to fit there anymore. Do you talk to them? Your family? Occasionally, but there's distance beyond the geography. They don't understand my work, my life here. They think I've become too American, lost touch with who I was supposed to be. She paused. Maybe they're right. Or maybe you're exactly who you were supposed to be, Lucas offered. Just not who they expected. Evelyn looked at him with surprise, as if the thought hadn't occurred to her. Before she could respond, Mia interjected with a question about Chinese New Year traditions, and the conversation shifted into lighter territory. Evelyn answered Mia's questions with patience and detail, explaining customs and sharing memories that made her eyes soften with nostalgia. Lucas watched them interact, saw the way Evelyn gradually loosened, her careful control giving way to something more natural. She laughed at Mia's jokes, real laughter, unfiltered and warm. She shared stories about growing up in Shanghai, about her grandmother who'd taught her calligraphy, about the food she missed and couldn't find anywhere in America. Around them, the ballroom continued its programmed evening. More speeches, more presentations, more carefully orchestrated moments designed to celebrate generosity and inspire continued donations. But at their table, time moved differently. They existed in a bubble of genuine connection, 3 people who'd found each other across the careful distances the room demanded. I need to tell you something, Evelyn said during a lull in the program, her expression turning serious. What you did tonight, speaking up for me, it meant more than you probably realize. I've spent years believing that success meant accepting isolation, that if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, eventually I'd stop caring about being alone. But I was wrong. Tonight reminded me that I still want connection, that I still need it. Everyone needs it, Lucas said, no matter how successful or self-sufficient they are. Yes, but wanting it and knowing how to create it are different things. I'm not good at this, at building relationships, at maintaining friendships. My work consumes me. I don't know how to be casual about connection. Maybe you don't need to be casual, Lucas suggested. Maybe you just need to be honest. Like you were on stage. That speech you gave after I spoke up, that was real. People responded to it because you stopped performing and started being authentic. It terrified me, Evelyn admitted. Letting them see me like that, vulnerable and uncertain. I know, but you did it anyway. That takes courage. So does standing up for a stranger in front of hundreds of people who've already dismissed you. They shared a look, recognition, understanding, the acknowledgement of courage in each other that neither fully saw in themselves. Are you two going to be friends now? Mia asked, looking between them with the directness only children possessed. Because I think you should be. You understand each other. Lucas felt heat creep up his neck. Mia, that's not... You can't just decide people should be friends. Why not? You like talking to each other. You both know Japanese, and you're both really nice even though other people are sometimes mean to you. That sounds like friend stuff to me. Evelyn's lips curved into a genuine smile. Your daughter makes an excellent point. Would you? She directed the question at Lucas, her expression vulnerable again. Would you be interested in staying in touch? I don't have many friends. Actually, I don't have any friends, if I'm being honest, but I'd like that to change. Lucas studied her carefully, seeing past the billionaire CEO to the lonely woman underneath. He thought about the gulf between their lives, the different worlds they inhabited, the vast disparity in resources and influence. Every practical instinct told him that friendship between them was unlikely, that their paths had crossed for one meaningful night but would diverge again immediately. But he also thought about loneliness, about how it felt to stand in rooms full of people and feel invisible, about wanting connection but not knowing how to reach for it, about his own small life that felt even smaller sometimes when he was surrounded by people who measured worth in dollars and influence. I'd like that, he said finally. I don't know what friendship looks like between a mechanic and a tech CEO, but we can figure it out. We absolutely can, Mia declared, as if the matter was now settled. Evelyn pulled out her phone, something sleek and expensive that probably had technology Lucas couldn't imagine, and they exchanged numbers. The simple act felt significant somehow, like crossing a threshold that couldn't be uncrossed. I travel a lot for work, Evelyn warned, and my schedule is often unpredictable. But I'll make time. I want to make time. We're pretty flexible, Lucas said. Not a lot of fancy commitments on our calendar. They talked until the program concluded, until the foundation director gave his closing remarks and thanked everyone for their generosity. Around them, people began gathering coats and preparing to leave. The evening was ending, returning everyone to their separate lives and carefully maintained distances. Sarah Kim appeared again, this time with the foundation's director beside her. He was a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and an easy smile that reached his eyes. "Mr. Reed, Ms. Zhao," he said warmly, "I wanted to thank you both before the evening concluded. What happened tonight, the honesty, the vulnerability, the willingness to challenge comfortable assumptions, that's what our foundation is supposed to be about. You reminded everyone why we do this work." "I didn't intend to make a scene," Evelyn said, though there was less apology in her voice than there might have been earlier. "The best moments rarely come from intention," the director replied. "They come from authenticity, and both of you brought that in abundance tonight." He turned to Lucas. "I'd love to talk with you sometime, if you're willing. Your story about how our partner organizations' work touched your life. That's exactly the kind of testimonial that helps people understand the real impact of what we do." Lucas nodded, overwhelmed but trying not to show it. "Sure. I'd be happy to help however I can." They exchanged information, more promises to stay in touch, more acknowledgments of the evening's unexpected turns. Then the director moved on to thank other guests, leaving them alone again. "Ready to go home, kiddo?" Lucas asked Mia, who'd started to droop against his side. "Yeah," she yawned. "This was the best dinner ever, Dad." "It was pretty special," Lucas agreed. They gathered their things, Mia's small purse, Lucas's borrowed jacket, and prepared to leave. Evelyn walked with them toward the exit, seeming reluctant to let the evening end. "Thank you," she said again as they reached the doors, "for everything, for seeing me, for speaking up, for giving me hope that connection is still possible." "Thank you for reminding me that standing up matters," Lucas replied, "that sometimes the risk of being seen is worth it." Mia hugged Evelyn suddenly, wrapping her arms around the billionaire's waist with the unselfconscious affection of childhood. Evelyn froze for a moment, clearly unused to physical contact, before carefully returning the embrace. "You're really nice," Mia said. "I'm glad we're friends now." "So am I," Evelyn said softly. "So am I." They separated then, Lucas and Mia heading toward the parking garage, while Evelyn returned to the ballroom for final conversations with Foundation leadership. But as Lucas helped Mia into his truck, old and battered and so clearly out of place in the hotel's garage, he found himself smiling. Tonight had been terrifying and overwhelming and completely unexpected. He'd exposed his deepest grief to a room full of strangers. He'd stood up when everything in him wanted to stay silent. He'd crossed boundaries that were supposed to keep people like him separate from people like Evelyn Zhao. But he'd also found something rare: connection. Understanding. The beginning of something that might become friendship, despite all the practical reasons it shouldn't work. "Dad?" Mia's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She was already buckled in, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Are we really going to be friends with Evelyn?" "I think so, yeah," Lucas said, starting the engine. "Good. She needs us. And I think maybe we need her too." Lucas pulled out of the garage, the city lights spreading before them. "Yeah, kiddo, I think maybe we do." The text message arrived 3 days later while Lucas was elbow-deep in an engine rebuild, his hands black with grease and his back protesting the angle he'd been hunched at for the past 2 hours. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he almost ignored it. Morrison's auto repair didn't exactly run on a schedule that accommodated frequent phone breaks, and his boss Jerry had already given him grief twice this week about checking messages during work hours. But something made him pause, wipe his hands on the already filthy rag hanging from his belt, and pull out his phone. The message was from an unknown number, but the words were unmistakable. This is Evelyn Zhao. I hope it's all right that I'm reaching out. I wanted to thank you again for Saturday night and to see if you and Mia might be free for coffee sometime this week. No pressure. I understand if your schedule doesn't allow it. Lucas read the message 3 times, his grease-stained thumb hovering over the screen. Part of him had assumed Saturday night would remain exactly that, one meaningful evening that faded into memory, a story he'd tell Mia when she was older about the time they befriended a billionaire at a charity dinner. He hadn't actually expected Evelyn to follow through on the friendship she'd suggested, despite the genuine emotion in her voice when they'd exchanged numbers. But here was the evidence, formal and careful and clearly nerve-wracking for her to send. Lucas could read the anxiety between the words, the over-explanation that came from someone who wasn't sure her presence would be welcome. Hey Reed, you planning to finish that transmission today, or are you just going to stand there staring at your phone like a teenager? Jerry's voice cut through the garage, good-natured but pointed. Sorry, boss, Lucas called back, already typing a response with thumbs that left smudged prints on the screen. Give me 5 minutes? Jerry grumbled something about 5 minutes turning into 20, but didn't push it. Lucas moved toward the garage's small break room, away from the noise of impact wrenches and the radio playing classic rock in the background. He typed carefully, deleting and rewriting twice before settling on something that felt right. Hi, Evelyn. Of course it's all right. We'd love to get coffee. Mia talks about you constantly. I think you made a serious impression. When works for you? The response came faster than he expected, as if she'd been waiting by her phone. Would Thursday afternoon work? I have meetings until 2, but I could meet you anywhere in the city after that. Lucas thought about his schedule. Thursday was usually slow at the garage, and he could probably convince Jerry to let him leave early if he came in at dawn to make up the hours. Mia had half-day kindergarten on Thursdays, which meant he'd need to coordinate with Mrs. Chen for pickup, but she'd been thrilled to hear about their evening at the charity dinner and would probably jump at the chance to help facilitate more contact with that nice Ms. Zhao. Thursday works. There's a coffee shop near my daughter's school, Morgan Street Cafe. 3 o'clock? Perfect. I'll see you then. Lucas stared at the exchange, still not quite believing it was happening. Then Jerry's voice echoed through the garage again, this time with less patience, and Lucas shoved his phone back in his pocket and returned to the transmission that needed rebuilding. But for the rest of the day, through oil changes and brake jobs and one particularly frustrating electrical issue that took 3 hours to diagnose, part of his mind stayed fixed on Thursday, on the strangeness of making plans with someone whose life existed in a completely different dimension from his own, on what they'd even talk about beyond the charged emotions of Saturday night, on whether friendship could actually survive outside the pressure cooker environment that had created it. Thursday afternoon arrived wrapped in the kind of gray drizzle that made the city feel smaller, more intimate. Lucas left the garage at 2:30, Jerry shaking his head but waving him off after Lucas had indeed shown up at 5 that morning to get ahead on the day's work. He picked up Mia from Mrs. Chen's apartment, where she'd been coloring pictures of dragons and practicing Mandarin characters under the older woman's patient guidance. You look nervous, Mrs. Chen observed as Lucas helped Mia into her jacket. It's just coffee, Lucas. She's a person, not a celebrity. She's kind of both, Lucas muttered, checking his reflection in Mrs. Chen's hallway mirror. He'd changed out of his work clothes into jeans and a button-down shirt that wasn't particularly nice, but was at least clean. His hands still carried faint traces of grease under the nails, no matter how hard he scrubbed, a permanent mark of his profession. She already knows what you do for a living, Mrs. Chen said, reading his anxiety with the ease of someone who'd known him for years. She knows you're a single father who works with his hands. If that was going to be a problem, she wouldn't have reached out. Stop overthinking it. I'm not overthinking it. Mrs. Chen raised an eyebrow. You changed shirts 3 times this morning before work. Mia told me. Mia needs to learn about confidentiality, Lucas said, but he was smiling despite himself. They arrived at Morgan Street Cafe 10 minutes early, the small shop warm and fragrant with coffee and fresh-baked pastries. Lucas had chosen this place deliberately. It was unpretentious and comfortable, the kind of neighborhood spot where mechanics and teachers and off-duty nurses grabbed their caffeine fix. Not the sort of place billionaire CEOs probably frequented, but also not so casual as to be uncomfortable. He hoped. Mia claimed a table near the window, pressing her face against the glass to watch for Evelyn's arrival. Lucas ordered them both hot chocolate, figuring coffee was wasted on an 8-year-old no matter how grown-up she was trying to be. He got himself a black coffee he didn't particularly want but needed something to do with his hands. They'd been sitting for maybe 5 minutes when a sleek black car pulled up outside, so obviously expensive that it drew stares even in the rain. Lucas felt his stomach tighten. This was a mistake. What had he been thinking? You couldn't just bridge the gap between their worlds with good intentions and one emotional night. But then Evelyn stepped out of the car, and Lucas's anxiety shifted into something else entirely. She wasn't wearing a business suit or evening gown. Instead, she had on dark jeans, boots, and a simple gray sweater under a black coat. Her hair was loose rather than pulled back severely, and she carried an umbrella that she struggled with for a moment before getting it open. She looked younger like this, more approachable, and significantly more nervous than he'd expected. She spotted them through the window, and her face transformed, anxiety giving way to something that looked like relief. She hurried inside, shaking rain from her umbrella and nearly knocking over the cafe's signboard in the process. "I'm so sorry I'm late," she said, reaching their table slightly breathless. "My meeting ran over, and then traffic was worse than I anticipated, and—" She stopped, seeming to realize she was over-explaining again. "Hi." "You're not late," Lucas said, standing to pull out a chair for her. "We were early. Can I get you something? Coffee? Tea?" "Coffee would be wonderful. Black, please." "Thank you." Lucas went to the counter, leaving Mia and Evelyn alone at the table. While he waited for the barista to pour Evelyn's coffee, he glanced back to see his daughter already chattering away, showing Evelyn something on the placemat, probably the word search puzzle she'd been working on while they waited. Evelyn was leaning in, genuinely interested, her earlier nervousness already starting to ease. "Your daughter's adorable," the barista said, a young woman with purple hair and multiple piercings. She'd served Lucas dozens of times over the past few years and knew Mia by name. "Who's her friend?" "Someone we met at an event," Lucas said, which was technically true even if it wildly undersold the situation. "She looks familiar. Is she an actress or something?" "Something like that." Lucas returned to the table with Evelyn's coffee, settling back into his seat. The cafe hummed with quiet conversation around them, rain pattering against the windows, creating a cocoon of normalcy that helped ease the surreal quality of the situation. "Mia was telling me about her school," Evelyn said, wrapping her hands around the coffee cup as if drawing warmth from it. "She says she's learning about the solar system." "I'm doing a project on Mars," Mia announced proudly. "Did you know Mars has 2 moons? They're called Phobos and Deimos." "I did know that," Evelyn said with a smile. "Do you know what those names mean?" Mia shook her head, eyes wide with curiosity. "They're from Greek mythology. Phobos means fear, and Deimos means dread. They were the sons of Ares, the god of war. The Romans called him Mars." "That's so cool!" Mia was practically bouncing in her seat. "Can you help me with my project? I have to present it next week, and Dad doesn't know much about mythology." "Hey now," Lucas protested mildly. "I know some mythology." "Hey, you thought Zeus was the god of the ocean?" Mia said with devastating accuracy. Evelyn laughed, a real, unguarded sound that made several people in the cafe turn to look. "I'd be happy to help," she said to Mia. "Mythology was one of my favorite subjects in school." They fell into easy conversation then, the initial awkwardness burning off like morning fog. Evelyn asked Mia about her other classes, her friends, what she liked to do for fun. Mia answered with characteristic enthusiasm, occasionally dragging Lucas into the conversation when she needed backup or wanted to share a story he featured in. Lucas found himself relaxing incrementally, the absurdity of the situation giving way to something more natural. Evelyn was different here than she'd been at the charity dinner. Still careful with her words, still choosing each phrase deliberately, but more animated, more present, as if the smaller, quieter setting allowed her to be more of herself. "Can I ask you something?" Mia said during a lull, looking at Evelyn with that directness that sometimes made Lucas's heart stop. "Why were those people so mean to you at the dinner?" Evelyn's expression flickered, surprise, then consideration. Lucas started to intervene, to redirect his daughter toward safer conversational territory, but Evelyn raised a hand gently. It's all right, she said. Then to Mia, that's a good question, and it deserves an honest answer. Do you know what assumptions are? Mia nodded. When you think you know something about someone before you really know them. Exactly. People make assumptions about me based on what they see on the outside. They see someone who's successful in business, who has money, and they assume that means I don't need kindness or friendship. They assume I'm cold or arrogant because I'm not comfortable in big social situations. And sometimes when people don't understand someone, they get frustrated or even angry. That's not fair, Mia said with the fierce conviction of childhood justice. No, it's not. But your father taught me something important that night. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak up when something isn't fair, even when it's scary, even when you're not sure anyone will listen. Mia looked at Lucas with pride so obvious it made his chest ache. Dad's really brave. He gets scared sometimes, but he does hard things anyway. That's the definition of courage, Evelyn said softly, her eyes meeting Lucas's across the table. Being scared, but doing what's right regardless. Lucas shifted uncomfortably under the combined weight of their attention. I don't know about brave. I just couldn't watch anymore. That's what makes it brave, Evelyn insisted. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's action despite fear. They talked for over an hour, the conversation ranging from mythology to Mia's hamster Mister. Whiskers to Evelyn's work in artificial intelligence explained in terms an 8-year-old could grasp. Evelyn ordered a second coffee and a pastry that she split with Mia, who declared it the best chocolate croissant she'd ever had. The cafe gradually filled with the after-work crowd, people stopping in for caffeine on their way home. But their table remained a small island of connection in the bustle. Eventually, Mia excused herself to use the restroom, leaving Lucas and Evelyn alone for the first time since she'd arrived. Thank you for coming, Evelyn said immediately, as if she'd been waiting for the chance to say it privately. I wasn't sure you would. I thought maybe Saturday night was just an anomaly, a moment that wouldn't translate to real life. I had the same thought, Lucas admitted. Wondered if friendship could actually work outside that pressure cooker. And now? Lucas considered the question, glancing toward the restroom door where Mia had disappeared. I think maybe it can. You're good with her, patient. You actually listen instead of just waiting for your turn to talk. She's easy to listen to. She says exactly what she means. There's no hidden agenda, no subtext to decode. It's refreshing. That's Mia, Lucas agreed. No filter, all heart. Evelyn's expression turned more serious. Can I ask you something about Saturday night? When you stood up, did you know what you were going to say? Did you plan it? Not even a little bit, Lucas said honestly. I saw you up there struggling, saw them turning hostile, and something in me just broke. All I could think about was how alone you looked, how familiar that feeling was. The words just came. The fact that you spoke Japanese, I still can't quite process it. The odds of someone in that room knowing my first language, understanding the cultural context. It wasn't odds, Lucas interrupted gently. It was grief. Sarah wanted so badly to learn Japanese, to really immerse herself in the culture. We studied together every night, practiced on our walks, corrected each other's pronunciation. After she died, I kept speaking it, kept studying. It was the last thing we'd shared, the last project we'd worked on together. I couldn't let it go. Evelyn reached across the table, her hand hovering near his for a moment before she pulled back, clearly uncertain about the gesture. I'm glad you didn't. I'm glad you were there. I'm glad you spoke up. So am I, Lucas said, and meant it. Mia returned then, announcing that Mr. Whiskers definitely needed a friend, and could they please get another hamster, launching into an elaborate argument about companionship and proper hamster social structures. Evelyn listened with amusement, occasionally glancing at Lucas as if to gauge how seriously she should take this campaign. We'll discuss it, Lucas said, which was his standard deflection for requests that ranged from additional pets to later bedtimes. That means maybe, Mia informed Evelyn sagely, which is better than no, but not as good as yes. Your daughter has the negotiation tactics of a seasoned executive, Evelyn observed. She gets that from her mother too, Lucas said. Sarah could talk me into anything. They stayed until the cafe started preparing for the dinner rush, the light outside shifting from gray afternoon to early evening gloom. Finally, reluctantly, Lucas checked his watch and realized they'd been talking for nearly 2 hours. "We should probably head home," he said. "It's getting late and this one has homework." "I finished my homework at Mrs. Chen's," Mia protested, but she was starting to droop against Lucas's arm in a way that suggested the day was catching up with her. Evelyn stood, gathering her coat and umbrella. "Thank you both for this, for making time, for giving me a chance to be just a person instead of a CEO or a donor or whatever other label people want to apply." "You're welcome here anytime," Lucas said. "This is kind of our regular spot. Thursday afternoons, usually, after I pick Mia up from school. You're always welcome to join us." Something shifted in Evelyn's expression. Hope mixed with disbelief, as if the concept of having a regular spot with regular friends was something she'd stopped allowing herself to imagine. "I'd like that," she said quietly. "Very much." They walked out together into the rain, Evelyn's car waiting at the curb with her driver standing patiently beside it. The contrast between her exit and theirs, Lucas's battered truck parked 2 blocks away because that's where he'd found street parking, should have been jarring. Should have reminded them both of the gulf between their lives. But Mia was hugging Evelyn goodbye, making her promise to come back next Thursday, and Evelyn was smiling with genuine warmth, and somehow the distance felt less important than the connection they'd built. "Same time next week?" Evelyn asked as her driver opened the car door. "Same time," Lucas confirmed. They parted then, Evelyn sliding into her car while Lucas and Mia headed toward his truck through the drizzle. Mia chattered the entire walk about mythology and Mars, and how Evelyn was the smartest person she'd ever met besides Mrs. Chen, and maybe her dad when he wasn't mixing up Greek gods. Lucas let her talk, his own thoughts circling around the afternoon, around the strangeness of building friendship across such different worlds, around the vulnerability he'd seen in Evelyn's eyes when she'd asked if they could make this regular, as if expecting rejection, around the realization that maybe they both needed this more than either wanted to admit. The next Thursday, Evelyn arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early, looking both eager and nervous. The Thursday after that, she brought materials to help Mia with her Mars project, actual NASA photographs and research papers simplified for an 8-year-old's understanding. The Thursday after that, when Lucas mentioned he was struggling with his truck's check engine light, Evelyn listened with genuine interest as he explained the diagnostic process, asking questions that showed she was actually engaged rather than just being polite. It became a routine. Every Thursday at 3, they met at Morgan Street Cafe. Sometimes they talked about serious things, Lucas's worries about affording Mia's future education, Evelyn's challenges managing a company while trying to maintain some semblance of work-life balance. Sometimes they talked about nothing important at all, favorite movies, books they'd read, the best dumplings in the city. The cafe staff started recognizing Evelyn, greeting her by name, learning that she took her coffee black and had a weakness for their lemon scones. The barista with purple hair stopped asking who she was and started just preparing her usual order when she walked in. Evelyn loosened incrementally with each visit. Her shoulders dropped from their defensive position. Her smiles came easier. She laughed more freely, the sound less startling each time. She still chose her words carefully, still processed social interactions with visible deliberation, but she stopped apologizing for it. And Lucas found himself looking forward to Thursdays with an intensity that surprised him. His life had been reduced to a simple pattern after Sarah died. Work, Mia, sleep, repeat. He'd convinced himself he was content with that wanting more was greedy when he already had his daughter and a job that paid the bills. But these Thursday afternoons reminded him that connection mattered, that adult friendship and intellectual stimulation, and someone seeing him as more than just a mechanic or a father filled spaces he'd forgotten were empty. 6 weeks into their Thursday routine, Evelyn arrived at the cafe looking troubled. She ordered her coffee with distracted thanks and sat down without her usual careful settling, her movements sharp with tension. "Everything okay?" Lucas asked while Mia was busy with a coloring book at the other end of the table. Evelyn stared at her coffee cup. "I have to give a presentation next week. Major tech conference. 3,000 people in the audience, live streaming to 50,000 more. My team keeps insisting I need to do it personally rather than sending a representative." "And you don't want to?" I'm terrified, she admitted quietly. After what happened at the charity dinner, the idea of standing in front of that many people, speaking publicly, I keep having nightmares about it. Freezing up, having the crowd turn hostile, making a fool of myself and by extension, my entire company. Lucas thought about the woman he'd first seen at the charity dinner, rigid with fear at a podium. Then he thought about the woman sitting across from him now, who could spend 2 hours explaining orbital mechanics to an 8-year-old without breaking stride. What's the presentation about? New AI applications for education, technology that personalizes learning for students with different needs, different learning styles. It's actually exciting work, some of the most meaningful projects we're doing, but explaining it to 3,000 people who are probably expecting me to fail, who says they're expecting you to fail? Evelyn looked up, surprise flickering across her features. After everything that's been written about me, the articles about my social awkwardness, my communication difficulties, trust me, there will be people in that audience waiting to watch me stumble. Maybe, Lucas acknowledged, but there will also be people who are there because they care about the work, because they want to understand what you're building. You think every person at the charity dinner was hostile? Most of them were just following Richard's lead because he was loud and they were uncomfortable. Once you gave them permission to see you as human, they came around. That was different. You spoke up. You gave them a reason to reconsider. I gave them information they didn't have, Lucas corrected, but you're the one who sealed it. That second speech you gave, when you stopped reading from notes and just talked about what you actually felt, that's what changed the room. That's what made them listen. Evelyn's hands tightened around her coffee cup. I don't know if I can do that in front of 3,000 people. What if you didn't think of it as 3,000 people? What if you thought of it like our Thursday afternoons? Like you're just explaining something you care about to someone who wants to understand? That's not the same thing at all, isn't it? When you talk about your work here, you get excited, animated. You forget to be nervous because you're focused on the ideas instead of the performance. What if you approach the presentation the same way? Evelyn shook her head, but Lucas could see her considering it. Even if I could manage that mindset, there's still the logistics, the stage, the lights, the knowing that thousands of eyes are on me. I can't just pretend that away. No, Lucas agreed. But you can prepare for it. Practice until the words are automatic, until you could give the presentation in your sleep. I've been practicing for weeks. It doesn't help. I freeze as soon as I imagine the actual audience. Lucas thought for a moment, an idea forming. What if you practiced with a real audience? Not 3,000 people, but more than just your team. People who'd give you honest feedback in a lower stakes environment. Where would I find an audience like that? Morrison's auto repair closes at 6, Lucas said slowly, the plan crystallizing as he spoke. But the building's still there. The garage bay could fit maybe 30, 40 people if we move some equipment. You could practice your presentation in front of actual people who have no idea who you are, who won't judge you based on articles they've read or assumptions about billionaire CEOs. Evelyn stared at him. You want me to give a tech presentation in an auto repair shop? I want you to practice in an environment where failure doesn't matter, where you can stumble and start over and no one's going to write an article about it. My coworkers are good people. Mechanics, detailers, the office staff. They'd be honest with you about what worked and what didn't. And if you freeze up, so what? You start again. Keep going until it feels natural. Evelyn stopped, seeming to process the offer. That's incredibly kind, but I couldn't impose like that. It's not an imposition. I'd have to clear it with Jerry, my boss, but he owes me favors and he's always complaining about how the garage needs better community connections. We could frame it as a cultural exchange or something. A cultural exchange between auto mechanics and AI technology, Evelyn said, and despite her anxiety, Lucas caught a hint of amusement in her voice. Why not? Your work affects everyone, right? Including people who rebuild transmissions for a living. Maybe they'd actually be interested in hearing about educational AI from the person building it. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, her expression cycling through doubt and hope and uncertainty. Finally, she nodded. Okay. If you can arrange it, I'll do it. I'll practice at your garage. Yeah? Lucas felt a smile spread across his face. Okay, let me talk to Jerry tomorrow. We'll make this happen. Mia looked up from her coloring book, clearly having eavesdropped on the entire conversation. Can I come watch? I want to see Evelyn's presentation. If it's after school hours and your dad says it's okay, Evelyn said, and Lucas noticed how easily she deferred to his parental authority, how she understood the boundaries without needing them spelled out. We'll see, Lucas said, giving Mia the same answer he always gave when he meant yes, but wanted to maintain the illusion of parental control. That night, after Mia was asleep, Lucas lay in bed thinking about what he'd committed to. Asking his blue-collar coworkers to sit through a tech presentation from a billionaire CEO was either inspired or insane, and he wasn't entirely sure which. Jerry would probably think he'd lost his mind. The other mechanics would razz him mercilessly about his fancy friends. But he also knew his coworkers, knew that beneath the rough language and the constant jokes, they were fundamentally good people who'd shown up for him when Sarah died, who'd covered his shifts when Mia was sick, who'd pitched in to help with her medical bills, who'd never once made him feel lesser for being a single dad struggling to hold everything together. If he explained it right, they'd understand. They'd show up, not because they cared about artificial intelligence or educational technology, but because Lucas was asking. Because somewhere along the way, despite all his efforts to stay invisible, he'd become part of their community. And maybe, just maybe, they'd help Evelyn see what he already knew, that she was worth believing in, worth supporting, worth showing up for. Even if she couldn't quite believe it herself yet. Jerry Morrison stood in the doorway of his office the next morning, coffee mug in hand, staring at Lucas like he'd just announced plans to convert the garage into a spaceship launch pad. "Run that by me again," Jerry said slowly, "because I could have sworn you just asked if a billionaire could practice a speech in my garage." Lucas wiped his hands on his coveralls, trying to project more confidence than he felt. "Evelyn Zhao. She's giving a major presentation next week, and she's nervous about public speaking. I offered her a chance to practice in front of a real audience in a low-pressure environment." "And by low-pressure environment, you mean my auto repair shop." "Our auto repair shop," Lucas corrected. "Come on, Jerry. You're always saying we should do more community outreach. This is community outreach." "Community outreach is sponsoring Little League teams, Reed, not hosting tech moguls." But Jerry's expression had shifted from outright disbelief to something more considering. "This the same woman from that charity dinner you went to? The one you told me about?" Lucas had shared a carefully edited version of the charity dinner events with Jerry, leaving out most of the emotional weight, but hitting the highlights. Jerry had listened with his typical gruff attention, then declared that Lucas had more guts than sense, which was high praise coming from a man who expressed affection through insults. "Yeah, same woman. She's become friends with Mia, with us. She needs help, and I thought, I don't know, maybe we could provide it." Jerry took a long sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving Lucas's face. "You sweet on her or something? Because I gotta tell you, the whole billionaire and the mechanic thing seems like a setup for heartbreak." "It's not like that," Lucas said quickly, heat creeping up his neck. "We're friends, that's all." "Uh-huh." But Jerry's skepticism was palpable. And this friend needs to practice talking in front of grease monkeys, because why exactly? Because she's terrified of public speaking, and she needs practice in front of people who aren't her employees or investors, people who will be honest with her, people who don't have any agenda beyond just listening. So she wants to practice on us because we're nobodies who don't matter. "No," Lucas said firmly. "She wants to practice with us because we're real, because we don't know enough about her world to judge her based on assumptions, because success and money haven't made her any less lonely or any less scared of being herself in front of people." Jerry studied him for another long moment, then sighed. "You're serious about this?" "I am." "And you think the crew would actually show up, sit through some tech presentation on their own time?" "I think if we explain it right, yeah. I think they'd show up for me. Maybe even for her, once they meet her." Jerry shook his head, but Lucas could see the resistance crumbling. "You're going to owe me for this, Reed, big time. I'm talking weekend shifts, overtime, the works. I'll take whatever you want to give me." "Fine, fine. When's she want to do this dog and pony show?" "Tomorrow night, after we close? I figure we could order pizza, make it casual." "Tomorrow night," Jerry repeated. "You don't ask for much, do you?" He drained his coffee mug, then pointed it at Lucas. "But here's the deal. You set this up, you make sure people actually show, and you handle any fallout if this goes sideways. And Reed? She better not show up here expecting us to bow and scrape just because she's rich. That happens. I'm pulling the plug. She won't, Lucas promised. Trust me, the last thing Evelyn wants is special treatment. Jerry snorted. We'll see about that. Now get back to work. The Camry's brake job isn't going to finish itself. Lucas spent the rest of the day spreading the word about tomorrow night's special event, as he'd started calling it. The reactions ranged from confused to skeptical to outright amused, but everyone he asked agreed to show up. Mike, the senior mechanic who'd been with Morrison's for 20 years, declared it the weirdest thing Lucas had ever asked for, but he'd be there. Tasha from the front office wanted to know if she should dress up. Ramon, the youngest mechanic who was still learning the trade, asked if there'd be food. There'll be pizza, Lucas assured them all. And you can wear whatever you want. Just show up and listen. Ask questions if you want. Be honest about whether her presentation makes sense to people outside the tech world. By the time he picked up Mia from Mrs. Chen's that evening, he had commitments from 15 people. Not a huge audience, but enough to feel real. Enough to matter. Did you ask everyone at the garage? Mia wanted to know as they drove home. Everyone who was working today. Yeah. And they all said yes? They did. Mia was quiet for a moment, then said, They're good people, Dad, even when they pretend to be grumpy. Lucas smiled. Yeah, kiddo, they really are. He texted Evelyn that night with the details. The response came within minutes, a mix of gratitude and nervousness that he could read even through the careful phrasing. Thank you for arranging this. I'm terrified, but I think that means it's exactly what I need. What should I bring? Just yourself and your presentation, Lucas typed back. We'll handle the rest. The next evening, Lucas arrived at the garage an hour before closing to help Jerry rearrange the main bay. They pushed 2 cars outside, moved tool chests against the walls, and set up folding chairs Jerry had pulled from the storage room. The space still smelled like motor oil and brake cleaner, and the floor was permanently stained despite their best cleaning efforts, but it was clean enough and the lighting was decent. This is the weirdest thing I've ever done, Jerry muttered, arranging chairs in rough rows. And I once rebuilt an engine in a Walmart parking lot on a bet. That's because you have poor impulse control, Lucas said, earning a middle finger thrown casually in his direction. By 6:30, people started arriving. Mike showed up in his usual jeans and Morrison's auto t-shirt, looking around the rearranged garage with amusement. Tasha had indeed dressed up, wearing a blouse instead of her usual hoodies, her makeup careful. Ramon brought his girlfriend, Maria, a nursing student who'd heard about the event and wanted to come. Mrs. Chen arrived with Mia, both of them carrying containers of homemade dumplings that Mrs. Chen insisted would be better than pizza. Jerry took one look at the food and declared Mrs. Chen was welcome at the garage any time. By 7 o'clock, 23 people had crowded into the garage, mechanics, office staff, a few regulars whose cars were in for service and who'd been intrigued by the invitation. It was a strange mix, blue-collar workers in coveralls sitting beside Mrs. Chen in her carefully pressed slacks, Mia bouncing with excitement in the front row. She's late, Jerry observed, checking his watch. Your billionaire friend gonna show, or did she realize how crazy this is? But Lucas was watching the street, and he saw the same black car from the cafe pull up outside. Evelyn stepped out, and Lucas's first thought was that she'd chosen her outfit perfectly. Not a business suit that would create distance, but nice jeans and a professional blouse, dressed up enough to show respect but not so formal as to seem unapproachable. She stood outside for a moment, staring at the garage with an expression Lucas recognized. The same look she'd worn at the charity dinner, the same fear he'd seen on her face at the podium. He walked outside to meet her. Hey, he said quietly. You okay? Evelyn's laugh was shaky. I'm about to give a presentation in an auto repair shop to people I've never met. I'm pretty far from okay. You want to bail? We can call this whole thing off. No hard feelings. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Lucas saw her making a choice. Saw her pulling together that same courage that had let her finish her speech at the charity dinner even after everything had gone wrong. No, she said firmly. No, I need to do this. I need to practice being brave when it's hard. Then let's go be brave, Lucas said. and offered her his arm. They walked into the garage together, and every head turned. Lucas felt Evelyn tense beside him, felt her breathing go shallow the way it did when she was overwhelmed. But then Mia was running toward them, throwing her arms around Evelyn's waist with the ease of established friendship. "You're here. I saved you a seat in the front row next to me and Mrs. Chen." The tension broke. Evelyn smiled down at Mia, her shoulders dropping incrementally, and let herself be led to the front of the garage where they'd set up a small table with a laptop and projector. Jerry stepped forward, and Lucas held his breath, hoping his boss would play this right. "Folks, this is Evelyn Zhao," Jerry said, his voice carrying the same authority he used when assigning work. "She's a friend of Lucas's, and she's asked if she can practice a presentation with us. Some tech stuff about education and AI. I don't know much about it, but Lucas vouched for her, and that's good enough for me. So let's give her our attention and our honest feedback. Sound good?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled group. Evelyn stood at the front, her hands clasped in front of her, looking at the faces watching her with expressions ranging from curious to friendly to openly skeptical. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I know this is unusual. I appreciate you giving me your time." She paused, seeming to gather herself. "Lucas suggested I practice here because he thought you'd be honest with me, that you wouldn't just tell me what you think I want to hear. So please, if something doesn't make sense, if I'm using too much jargon, if I lose you, stop me. Ask questions. This only works if you're real with me." "You got it," Mike called from the third row. "We're real good at being real." Scattered laughter. Evelyn's smile was nervous but genuine. She started her presentation, and Lucas watched her transform. The first few minutes were shaky, her voice uncertain, her hands trembling slightly as she advanced slides. But she was talking about work she loved, technology she believed in, and gradually the passion overtook the fear. She explained how current education systems were built on the assumption that all students learn the same way, at the same pace. How AI could personalize learning, identifying where individual students struggled and adapting in real time to provide support. How this could help kids who'd been left behind by one-size-fits-all approaches finally catch up and even excel. "Think about a student who's great at math conceptually but struggles with word problems," Evelyn said, her voice stronger now. "Traditional education might label that student as bad at math, but AI can identify the specific issue. Maybe it's reading comprehension, maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's the way the problems are phrased, and adapt the teaching method accordingly. It stops being about labeling kids as smart or struggling and starts being about meeting them where they are." Ramon raised his hand. "So like, the computer figures out how each kid learns best." "Exactly. Some kids are visual learners, some learn better through hands-on practice, some need concepts explained multiple ways before they click. The AI can test different approaches and identify what works for each individual student." "That's actually pretty cool," Ramon's girlfriend Maria said. "I had a nephew who got written off as a problem student, but he just had dyslexia that nobody caught until middle school. Something like this could have identified that earlier, right?" Evelyn's face lit up. "Yes, that's exactly the kind of situation this technology is designed to address. Early identification of learning differences, immediate adaptation of teaching methods, ongoing support that evolves with the student's needs." The questions started coming faster then. Tasha wanted to know about privacy concerns. Mike asked how teachers would fit into this new system. Mrs. Chen inquired about language support for immigrant students. Each question was met with thoughtful answers, Evelyn's nervousness burning away as she engaged with genuine curiosity. Lucas watched from the side, pride swelling in his chest. This was what she'd needed, not an audience of investors looking for return on investment, not tech journalists hunting for controversial quotes, but real people asking real questions about how this technology would actually affect lives. About 20 minutes in, Evelyn stumbled over a section explaining the technical architecture. She'd launched into jargon about neural networks and machine learning algorithms, and Lucas could see eyes glazing over in the audience. "Hold up," Jerry interrupted, raising his hand. "You lost me at neural networks. Can you explain that in, like, car terms?" Evelyn stopped, clearly thrown. "Car terms?" "Yeah, like I understand how engines work. Fuel, combustion, pistons. Give me the car version of whatever you just said. Evelyn thought for a moment, then smiled. Okay. Think about how a modern car's computer manages the engine. It's constantly monitoring dozens of sensors, oxygen levels, temperature, fuel mixture, and making tiny adjustments to optimize performance. It learns your driving patterns and adapts accordingly. That's essentially what machine learning does, but for education. Constant monitoring, constant adjustment, optimizing for each individual student's performance. Jerry nodded slowly. That I understand. Keep going. She continued, and Lucas noticed she'd shifted her language. Less jargon, more practical examples. She talked about struggling students the way he talked about troubled engines, problems to be diagnosed and solved, not failures to be dismissed. Halfway through, she paused for questions, and Mia raised her hand solemnly. Yes, Mia? Would this help kids like me, who had to miss a lot of school because they were sick? The garage went quiet. Evelyn's expression softened into something tender. That's exactly who it would help, she said gently. When students miss school for any reason, illness, family emergencies, anything, they fall behind. By the time they come back, the class has moved on, and they're lost. This technology would identify exactly what they missed, provide personalized catch-up support, and help them get back on track without the shame of being behind or the struggle of trying to figure it out alone. Mia nodded, satisfied. Good, because it's really hard to catch up, even when teachers are nice about it. I know, Evelyn said, and I'm sorry that was hard for you. This technology is meant to make sure other kids don't have to struggle the way you did. Something passed between them then, understanding, connection, the recognition that technology could be about more than profit or innovation. It could be about dignity, about making sure kids didn't fall through cracks just because their circumstances didn't fit the system. Lucas felt his throat tighten. He'd known Evelyn's work mattered intellectually, but seeing it explained this way, seeing how it connected to real lives, including his daughter's, drove it home in a way that statistics never could. The presentation continued. Evelyn talked about implementation challenges, about working with school districts, about the importance of keeping human teachers central to the process rather than replacing them with algorithms. She fielded questions about cost, about accessibility, about whether this would widen the gap between well-funded and struggling schools. That's my biggest concern too, she admitted. Technology should be an equalizer, not another way to stratify education by wealth. That's why we're working on partnerships with public school systems, why we're pricing this to be accessible, why we're committed to providing support in underserved communities first. Because if we only help kids who already have advantages, we've failed. You really believe that? Mike asked, his tone skeptical but not hostile. Or is that just good PR? Evelyn didn't flinch. I believe it. I was an immigrant kid who didn't speak English, whose parents couldn't afford tutors or test prep. I succeeded because one teacher saw potential in me and fought to get me into programs I couldn't have accessed otherwise. This technology is my way of scaling that teacher's impact, of making sure kids don't need to get lucky with one exceptional advocate. They should all have access to personalized support. The room was completely silent. Lucas could see the shift happening, the same shift that had occurred at the charity dinner. People were seeing her as human, as someone driven by genuine purpose rather than profit. Evelyn finished her presentation with a call to action about supporting education innovation, then stood waiting for feedback with visible anxiety. The applause started slowly. Mrs. Chen first, then Mia, then others joining in until the whole garage was clapping. Not the polite charity dinner applause, but genuine appreciation. That was good, Jerry said, standing up. Really good. You made complicated stuff make sense, and you didn't talk down to us, which I appreciate. The part in the middle got a little technical, Tasha offered. When you were explaining the data collection process, maybe more examples there? And maybe practice the transitions between sections, Mike added. A couple times you seemed to lose your place. Evelyn was nodding, taking it all in, and Lucas could see her mentally cataloging the feedback. What about the opening? Did it grab your attention? Could be stronger, Ramon said. Like, start with a story maybe? The thing about your teacher who helped you, that was compelling. Lead with that. They spent another 30 minutes in detailed feedback, the garage crew offering suggestions with surprising sophistication. These were people who solved complex problems daily, who had to communicate technical information to customers who didn't know a carburetor from a catalytic converter. They understood how to explain complicated things simply. And Evelyn listened to every word, asked follow-up questions, took notes on her phone. She didn't dismiss their input or suggest they didn't understand the stakes. She treated their feedback as valuable, which made them invest more in helping her succeed. Finally, as the pizza boxes were being opened and the formal presentation gave way to casual conversation, Jerry pulled Lucas aside. "Your friend's all right," he said quietly. "Not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone more, I don't know, more like the billionaires you see on TV, disconnected, arrogant, but she's just nervous and trying hard and actually gives a damn about what she's doing." He paused. "She reminds me of you, actually. That same intensity about doing things right." Lucas felt warmth spread through his chest. "Thanks, Jerry." "Don't let it go to your head. You still owe me 3 weekends." But Jerry was smiling. Across the garage, Evelyn was deep in conversation with Mrs. Chen about language acquisition and immigrant education. Mia was showing Ramon's girlfriend her Mars project, using terminology she'd learned from Evelyn. Mike was asking detailed questions about data privacy that Evelyn was answering without condescension. It was chaotic and loud and nothing like a professional focus group. It was perfect. Lucas made his way over to Evelyn, who looked up at his approach with an expression of overwhelmed gratitude. "Thank you," she said quietly, though she had to raise her voice to be heard over the conversations around them. I can't even explain what this was." "It was practice," Lucas said simply. "Real feedback from real people. That's what you needed." "It was more than that. It was acceptance. They didn't judge me for being nervous. They just helped me get better." "That's what community does," Lucas said. "When you let people in, when you're honest about needing help, most people show up. You just have to give them the chance." Evelyn's eyes were bright, and Lucas wondered if she was fighting tears. "I've spent so much time building walls to protect myself, convincing myself I didn't need anyone. But I do need people. I need this." She gestured at the garage, at the people eating pizza and arguing good-naturedly about education policy. "I need to be part of something real." "Then be part of it," Lucas said. "You're already welcome here. You proved that tonight." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the impromptu party happening around them. Eventually, Mia appeared at Lucas's side, tugging on his sleeve. "Dad, Mrs. Chen says we should go soon. It's getting late." Lucas checked his watch, surprised to find it was nearly 9:30. "Yeah, you're right. School tomorrow." They started gathering their things, saying goodbyes. Jerry shook Evelyn's hand with unexpected warmth, telling her she was welcome back any time. Mike offered advice about pacing that Evelyn accepted with genuine appreciation. Tasha hugged her, which seemed to startle Evelyn, but in a good way. Outside, standing next to her waiting car, Evelyn looked back at the garage with an expression Lucas couldn't quite name. "I was so scared coming here tonight," she said. "Scared they'd laugh at me, scared I'd freeze up, scared I'd confirm every negative assumption about myself. But instead you found people who saw you as human and treated you accordingly," Lucas finished. "Yes." She turned to face him fully. "You keep doing that. You keep showing me that connection is possible when I'd convinced myself it wasn't. You and Mia, you're changing my life in ways I'm still processing." "You're changing ours too," Lucas said honestly. "Mia's never had an adult friend besides Mrs. Chen who takes her seriously, who engages with her curiosity instead of just patting her on the head. And He paused, trying to find the right words. "I'd forgotten what it felt like to have a friend who challenged me intellectually, who reminded me I'm more than just a mechanic and a dad." "You were never just anything," Evelyn said firmly. "You're brilliant and kind and braver than you give yourself credit for. Don't diminish yourself." Mia yawned dramatically from where Mrs. Chen was holding her hand a few feet away, clearly ready to go home. "I should get her to bed," Lucas said. "But good luck next week with the real presentation. You're going to be amazing." "Will you be there? At the conference?" Lucas almost laughed. "I don't think auto mechanics get invited to major tech conferences. I can get you credentials. Both of you. You and Mia. If you want to come, if you want to be there. She looked vulnerable again, uncertain. I'd like to have friendly faces in the audience. People who've seen me at my worst and still believe I can do this. Lucas thought about his schedule, about convincing Jerry to give him a day off, about whether dragging an 8-year-old to a tech conference made any sense. But he also thought about the woman in front of him who was asking not as a CEO to an employee, but as a friend to a friend. We'll be there, he promised. Front row if they'll let us. Evelyn's smile was radiant. Thank you. For everything. For tonight, for believing in me, for being my friend when I'd stopped believing friendship was possible. That's what friends do, Lucas said simply. They show up. And as he drove home through the city streets, Mia already dozing in the back seat, Lucas realized he'd meant it. Somewhere between that charity dinner and this moment, between Thursday coffee dates and tonight's garage presentation, Evelyn Zhao had stopped being the isolated billionaire he'd defended on principle and become something else entirely. She'd become someone he cared about, someone whose success mattered to him personally, someone he wanted to protect and support and see thrive. Not because she was powerful or influential or rich, but because she was Evelyn, his friend, someone who saw him and Mia as fully human and valuable, and who deserved that same recognition reflected back. The tech conference was in 4 days. Lucas had no idea what to expect, how to navigate that world, whether he'd be wildly out of place among the suits and investors and industry leaders. But Evelyn had asked him to be there, and Lucas had learned something important over the past weeks. Sometimes being brave meant showing up even when you didn't belong, speaking up even when silence was easier, reaching across divides that seemed unbridgeable. Sometimes being brave meant being a friend, and Lucas was determined to be exactly that. The Pinnacle Convention Center was everything Lucas expected and worse. Glass and steel stretched toward the sky, the building's modern architecture designed to intimidate as much as impress. People in expensive suits moved through the massive lobby with the confidence of those who belonged, their credentials hanging from lanyards, their conversations peppered with acronyms Lucas didn't recognize. He stood just inside the entrance with Mia's hand gripped tightly in his, both of them wearing the nicest clothes they owned. Lucas in the same borrowed suit from the charity dinner, Mia in a dress Mrs. Chen had insisted on buying special for the occasion. They looked presentable enough, but Lucas felt the familiar weight of not belonging pressing down on his shoulders. "Dad, you're doing the thing again," Mia whispered, and Lucas realized he'd been tugging at his collar. "Sorry, kiddo, just a lot of people." Evelyn said to meet her at the registration desk, Mia said, already pulling him forward with the fearlessness of someone too young to understand social hierarchies. "Come on." They navigated through the crowd to the registration area, where a young woman in a blazer checked their names against a list and handed them VIP credentials with expressions of mild surprise. Apparently mechanics and 8-year-olds weren't the usual recipients of front-row access at major tech conferences. "Ms. Zhao left instructions that you should be brought to the green room," the woman said, gesturing to a security guard. "Marcus will escort you." They followed Marcus through a maze of hallways, past rooms where other speakers were preparing, past volunteers setting up water stations and adjusting microphones. The scale of the event was overwhelming. This wasn't a charity dinner with a few hundred attendees. This was thousands of people gathering to hear about the future of technology, and Evelyn was expected to command their attention for 45 minutes. Marcus stopped outside a door marked "Speaker Prep, Room 3", and knocked gently. "Ms. Zhao, your guests are here." The door opened and Evelyn appeared, and Lucas's first thought was that she looked terrified. She was dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than his truck, her hair pulled back in a professional style, her makeup flawless. But her eyes held the same fear he'd seen at the charity dinner, and her hands were trembling slightly. "You came," she said, and the relief in her voice was palpable. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come." "We promised," Mia said, stepping forward to hug Evelyn around the waist. "And Dad always keeps his promises." Evelyn returned the hug, some of the tension visibly draining from her shoulders. "Come in, please. I have about 20 minutes before I need to go on stage, and I'm struggling." The green room was small but comfortable, equipped with a couch, a mirror, and a table laden with water bottles and energy bars that Evelyn clearly hadn't touched. She closed the door behind them and leaned against it, closing her eyes for a moment. 3,000 people, she said quietly. The garage practice helped, your feedback helped, but 3,000 people, Lucas. I keep thinking about what happened at the charity dinner, about freezing up, about the crowd turning hostile, about... Hey, Lucas interrupted gently, moving to stand in front of her. Look at me. Evelyn opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. You've prepared for this. You've practiced. You know this material better than anyone in that auditorium. And more importantly, you believe in it. You're not performing for them. You're sharing something you've built that's going to change lives. That matters more than their expectations or your anxiety. But what if I freeze again? What if the words just stop? Then you pause, take a breath, and start again. The people at the garage didn't judge you when you stumbled. They helped you find better ways to explain things. This audience might not be as generous, but the ones who matter will be paying attention to your ideas, not your delivery. Mia had settled onto the couch, swinging her legs. You want to know a secret, she said to Evelyn. When Dad gets nervous, he pretends he's talking to me, just me. He says it makes everything less scary. Evelyn looked at Mia with surprise. Does that really work? It works for him. Maybe it'll work for you too. Just pretend you're back at the coffee shop, telling me about your work. Forget about everyone else. A knock at the door interrupted them. A headset-wearing woman poked her head in. Ms. Zhao? 5-minute warning. We'll need you backstage. Evelyn's face went pale. Okay. Thank you. The woman disappeared. Evelyn stood there, breathing too fast, her hands clenched at her sides. Lucas could see her spiraling, anxiety feeding on itself, threatening to pull her under before she even reached the stage. Evelyn, he said firmly. She looked at him. Do you remember what you told me at the garage? About why you're doing this work? Yes. Because I was the immigrant kid who needed help. Because education saved my life, and I want to make sure other kids have the same chance. That's your anchor. When you get overwhelmed up there, when the crowd feels too big or the pressure too much, come back to that. Remember the kid you were, struggling in a system that wasn't designed for you. Remember the teacher who saw your potential. Remember why this technology matters beyond the business case or the innovation metrics. Evelyn nodded, still pale but steadier. Okay, yes, I can do that. And remember, Mia added, standing up to take Evelyn's hand, we'll be right there in the front row. If you get scared, just look at us. We're your friends, and we believe in you. Evelyn crouched down to Mia's level, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Thank you, both of you, for being here, for believing in me when I'm still learning to believe in myself. Another knock. Ms. Zhao, we really need you backstage now. Evelyn straightened, pulling in a deep breath. Lucas saw her making the same choice she'd made at the charity dinner, at the garage practice. The choice to be brave even when being scared would be easier. I'm ready, she said. They followed her out, Marcus appearing again to escort Lucas and Mia to their reserved seats in the front row while Evelyn disappeared backstage. The auditorium was massive, tiered seating rising toward the back, giant screens flanking the stage, lighting rigs that probably cost more than Lucas's annual salary. And it was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls, the energy of anticipation humming through the space. Lucas and Mia took their seats, and Lucas immediately felt eyes on them. The people around them were industry professionals, investors, journalists, all dressed in expensive business attire. A man in the seat next to Lucas looked at their credentials, then at them, confusion clear in his expression. Are you press? The man asked. No, Lucas said simply. Friends of the speaker. Oh. The man processed this, clearly trying to reconcile their appearance with Evelyn Zhao's usual circles. I didn't know she had friends. The comment was casual, not meant cruelly, but it landed hard anyway. Lucas thought about the lonely woman at the charity dinner, the one everyone had decided was cold and aloof, the one who'd been so starved for basic human connection that a child's friendship had nearly broken her composure. She does now, Lucas said firmly. The lights dimmed, the crowd quieted. A man in an expensive suit took the stage, launching into an introduction that highlighted Evelyn's achievements, her company's valuation, Her position is one of the youngest self-made billionaires in tech. All impressive, all true, and all completely missing what actually mattered about her. Then Evelyn walked onto the stage, and Lucas felt his heart clench with empathy. She looked small up there, despite her presence, vulnerable despite her success. The spotlight found her and she froze for just a moment, her eyes scanning the crowd with visible panic. But then her gaze found Lucas and Mia in the front row, found the two familiar faces in a sea of strangers, and something shifted in her expression. She stepped to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and began to speak. When I was 8 years old, I couldn't read English. Her voice was quiet but steady, carrying through the sound system. I'd been in America for 6 months, placed in a classroom where I didn't understand anything. The teacher talked and I heard noise. The other kids read and I saw symbols I couldn't decode. I was lost, falling further behind every day, and I was terrified that I was stupid, that I'd never catch up, that I'd be the dumb foreign kid forever. The auditorium was completely silent. This wasn't the typical tech conference opening. No jokes about the industry, no meta-commentary about innovation. This was raw and personal and immediate. Then one day, a teacher named Mrs. Patterson noticed me crying in the library. She didn't speak Mandarin, and I barely spoke English, but she sat with me anyway. She pulled out a picture book and started reading, slowly, pointing at the words and the images. She came back every day for 3 months, teaching me English one picture book at a time, staying after school when she should have been going home to her own family. Evelyn paused, and Lucas could see her pulling strength from the memory. Mrs. Patterson personalized my education before we had algorithms to do it. She identified my specific need, adapted her teaching method, met me where I was instead of where the curriculum said I should be, and because of her, I learned to read. I learned to love learning. I eventually became the person standing before you today. She clicked to her first slide. Not data or graphs, but a photo of a young woman with kind eyes. Mrs. Patterson, clearly decades ago. She died 5 years ago, Evelyn continued, her voice thick with emotion. I never got to tell her what her patience and personalization meant to me. I never got to show her what I built. But everything I'm about to share with you, every line of code, every algorithm, every innovation, it all started with her, with one teacher who refused to let a struggling student fall through the cracks. Lucas felt Mia grip his hand tightly. Around them, the audience sat transfixed. This wasn't what they'd expected from the famously reticent Evelyn Zhao. The technology I'm here to discuss today is called Adapt Learn, Evelyn said, her voice growing stronger. It's an AI-powered educational platform designed to do at scale what Mrs. Patterson did for me, to identify where each student struggles, to adapt teaching methods in real time, to ensure that every child gets the personalized support they need to succeed. She launched into her presentation, and Lucas watched her transform. She was still nervous. He could see it in the way she gripped the podium occasionally, in the careful breath she took between sections. But she was also passionate, articulate, completely present. She explained complex technology in terms anyone could understand, using the techniques the garage crew had suggested. She told stories about real students whose lives had been changed by early implementations. She addressed concerns about privacy, about replacing teachers, about accessibility with thoughtfulness and honesty. And she kept glancing at the front row, at Lucas and Mia, drawing strength from their presence the way she'd said she would. About 20 minutes in, during the Q&A portion, a man in the 5th row stood up. Lucas recognized the tone before the man even spoke. Aggressive, confrontational, looking for a fight. Ms. Zhao, your presentation is compelling, but let's address the elephant in the room. Zenith Technologies has faced significant criticism for labor practices, for automation that eliminates jobs. How do we know this isn't just another way to cut costs by replacing human teachers with algorithms? The question was designed to derail, to put Evelyn on the defensive. Lucas saw her freeze for just a moment, saw the fear flicker across her face. The charity dinner all over again, public challenge, hostile energy. The crowd waiting to see if she'd crumble. But this time, Evelyn didn't crumble. That's a fair question, she said, her voice steady. And it deserves a direct answer. Yes, Zenith has made mistakes. We've automated processes that eliminated positions, and we didn't do enough to support the workers affected by those changes. I take responsibility for that. We're implementing retraining programs now, but that doesn't undo the harm already done. The honesty seemed to surprise the questioner. The room was completely silent. But AdaptLearn isn't about replacing teachers, Evelyn continued. It's about empowering them. Teachers spend enormous amounts of time on administrative tasks, on one-size-fits-all lesson planning, on trying to meet the needs of 30 different students with 30 different learning styles. This technology handles the personalization and adaptation, freeing teachers to do what they do best: build relationships, inspire curiosity, provide the human connection that no algorithm can replicate. Mrs. Patterson changed my life, not because she was an efficient information delivery system, but because she cared, because she saw me as a whole person. That's what teachers do. Technology should support that, not replace it. She paused, and Lucas could see her gathering courage for what came next. I know my company has made mistakes. I know I've made mistakes. Success in business doesn't make you infallible. It just makes your mistakes more visible and more consequential. But I'm trying to do better, to build technology that serves humanity instead of just extracting value from it. To remember that behind every data point is a real person whose life matters. That's what Mrs. Patterson taught me, and it's what I'm trying to honor with this work. The silence broke into applause. Not universal, some people still looked skeptical, but genuine from those who appreciated the honesty. The man who'd asked the question sat down, looking somewhat mollified. Evelyn fielded more questions, each one answered with the same combination of technical expertise and human understanding. She stumbled over a word here and there, had to pause to gather her thoughts occasionally, but she never lost the thread. Never let the fear win. And through it all, Lucas watched with something that felt like pride. This was what courage looked like. Not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear make your choices for you. The presentation concluded to standing ovation. Not everyone stood, some investors remained seated, some journalists looked skeptical, but enough people were on their feet that it clearly moved Evelyn. She stood at the podium, visibly overwhelmed, her eyes finding Lucas and Mia again. Lucas stood, pulling Mia up with him, and they clapped until their hands hurt. Evelyn left the stage and was immediately swarmed by people, investors wanting meetings, journalists requesting interviews, other tech leaders offering congratulations or challenges. Lucas watched from the front row as she was pulled into conversation after conversation, her expression cycling between overwhelmed and determined. "Should we go find her?" Mia asked. "Let's give her a few minutes," Lucas said. "She's got a lot of people wanting her attention right now." They made their way out of the auditorium into the convention center's main hall, where vendors had set up booths showcasing various technologies. Mia was immediately drawn to a demonstration of educational robotics, and Lucas let her explore while keeping her in sight. "Excuse me." A woman's voice made Lucas turn. She was in her 40s, professionally dressed, with a warmth to her expression that seemed genuine. "I couldn't help but notice you were sitting in the reserved section. Are you with Zenith Technologies?" "No," Lucas said. "Just friends of Miss Zhao." "Really? That's wonderful. I'm Dr. Jennifer Martinez. I run an educational nonprofit focused on immigrant and refugee children. Miss Zhao's presentation was, well, it was exactly what we've been looking for, the kind of technology that could transform how we serve our students." She pulled out a business card, pressing it into Lucas's hand. "I know she's swamped right now, but if you could pass this along, tell her we'd love to discuss a partnership. We work with the kids who need this most, the ones falling through the cracks the way she described." "I'll make sure she gets it," Lucas promised. Dr. Martinez wasn't the only one. Over the next hour, as Mia explored the convention floor, Lucas was approached by teachers, administrators, parents, all of them moved by Evelyn's presentation, all of them wanting to connect, to help, to be part of what she was building. He collected business cards and contact information, promises to follow up, stories about students who needed exactly what AdaptLearn offered. It was overwhelming in the best way. These weren't investors looking for returns. They were people who understood that education could save lives because they'd witnessed it firsthand. "Dad, look!" Mia's excited voice pulled him toward a booth showcasing virtual reality educational experiences. A demonstration was running, Kids with VR headsets exploring the solar system in 3 dimensions. That's so cool, Mia breathed. Can I try? Before Lucas could answer, a familiar voice spoke from behind them. I think that can be arranged. They turned to find Evelyn standing there, looking exhausted but radiant. She'd lost the jacket from her suit, her hair had come partially loose, and there was a flush to her cheeks that suggested she'd been talking non-stop since leaving the stage. You were amazing, Mia said, launching herself at Evelyn for the second time that day. Everyone loved it. Evelyn hugged her back, then looked at Lucas over Mia's head. The question in her eyes was obvious. She's right, Lucas said. You were incredible, honest, passionate, clear. Everything you needed to be. I almost lost it when that man challenged me. I could feel myself starting to freeze up. She paused. But then I remembered what you said, about coming back to why it matters, about the kid I was. And I realized I wasn't just defending my work. I was defending everyone who's ever been that kid. That made it easier. You didn't just defend it. You owned your mistakes and promised to do better. That took real courage. Evelyn's eyes were bright again, but with tears of relief this time, rather than fear. I couldn't have done it without you, without knowing you and Mia were out there, without the practice at the garage, the feedback, the belief that I could be more than my anxiety. You were always more than your anxiety, Lucas said firmly. We just helped you remember that. They arranged for Mia to try the VR demonstration, then stood watching her exclaim over virtual planets and asteroids. I got about 50 interview requests, Evelyn said quietly. 3 different venture capital firms want meetings. A reporter from Tech Insider wants to do a profile. My assistant is losing her mind trying to coordinate everything. That's good, right? Means the presentation landed. It is good. It's great, actually, but it's also overwhelming. All these people wanting pieces of me, wanting to categorize and analyze and extract value. She looked at him. That's why I needed to find you. Because you and Mia, you don't want anything from me except friendship. You don't see me as an investment opportunity or a controversial figure or a story to write. You just see Evelyn. That's all you've ever needed to be, Lucas said. Just Evelyn. That's enough. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Mia navigate the virtual solar system with unselfconscious joy. Around them, the convention buzzed with activity, deals being made, connections being forged, the future of technology being negotiated in 100 simultaneous conversations. But in their small bubble, things were simpler. 2 friends who'd found each other across impossible distance, who'd proven that connection could survive wealth disparities and social expectations and all the barriers the world erected between people. I have a proposition, Evelyn said suddenly, and I want you to think about it before answering. Lucas looked at her warily. Okay. Zenith is launching a community outreach initiative, part of our effort to do better, to be better. We want to partner with local organizations, schools, community centers, build bridges between the tech world and the communities we serve. She paused. I'd like you to help lead that initiative. Lucas stared at her. What? You understand both worlds. You can talk to engineers and mechanics, to wealthy donors and struggling families. You've lived through loss and rebuilt a life worth living. You raise an incredible daughter while working full-time. And most importantly, you see people. Really see them. That's what this initiative needs. Someone who won't let us hide behind corporate speak, who'll make sure we're actually serving communities instead of just photographing ourselves pretending to care. Evelyn, I'm a mechanic. I don't have a college degree. I don't know anything about running corporate initiatives. You know about connecting with people authentically, about building trust, about showing up when it's hard. Those are the skills that matter. She looked at him intently. I'm not asking you to become someone else. I'm asking you to do what you already do. See what others miss. Speak up when something's wrong. Help build bridges across divides. We'd train you on the technical aspects. We'd pay you well enough that you wouldn't have to worry about Mia's future. But mostly, I just want to work with someone I trust. Someone who will tell me the truth even when it's uncomfortable. Lucas's mind was spinning. Leave Morrison's auto repair. Take a job at a tech company? The whole idea seemed absurd, impossible, completely outside the realm of his experience. But then he thought about the garage presentation, about how his coworkers had shown up and engaged thoughtfully with complex ideas because they'd been approached with respect, about Dr. Martinez and all the others who'd approached him today with stories about students who needed exactly what Evelyn was building, about the business cards currently stuffed in his pocket, connections between the tech world and the real world, bridges he was apparently uniquely positioned to build. "I need to think about it," he said finally. "Of course. Take all the time you need. Talk to Mia, to Mrs. Chen, to Jerry. I just wanted you to know the offer exists." Evelyn smiled, because somewhere between that charity dinner and this moment, you became one of the most important people in my life. And I want to build a world where your skills and perspective are valued as highly as any technical degree. Mia finished her VR experience and came bounding over, chattering about virtual asteroids and explaining that she definitely wanted to be an astronaut now. Or maybe an astronaut who also speaks 5 languages, because why choose just one dream? They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the convention, Evelyn introducing them to other speakers and innovators, treating Lucas and Mia not as curiosities but as valued friends. The looks they got ranged from confused to intrigued to occasionally dismissive, but Evelyn never wavered. She didn't apologize for their presence or explain why a mechanic and his daughter were getting VIP treatment. She just treated them like they belonged, which somehow made them belong. That evening, long after the convention had ended, Lucas sat in his small apartment while Mia slept in the next room. He thought about Evelyn's offer, about the life change it represented, about whether he was brave enough to leap into something so far outside his experience. His phone buzzed, a text from Evelyn. "Thank you for today, for being there, for believing in me. Whatever you decide about the job, know that your friendship has already changed my life. You taught me that success without connection is just loneliness and expensive packaging. I won't forget that." Lucas smiled, typing back. "You taught me that courage isn't about never being scared. It's about being terrified and showing up anyway. That's a lesson I needed too." The response came quickly. "Then we've taught each other well. That's what friendship is supposed to do." Lucas set down his phone and looked around his apartment. It was small but comfortable, filled with photos of Mia and Sarah, with the life he'd built from grief and determination. Leaving Morrison's would mean leaving familiarity, security, the known quantity of his existence. But staying meant remaining safe in ways that were starting to feel like stagnation. He thought about Sarah, about what she'd say if she were here. She'd always been the brave one, the one who pushed for adventure, who'd convinced him that moving to Tokyo was the right choice even when it terrified him. She'd wanted Mia to grow up seeing that life could be bigger than the boundaries fear erected. She'd want him to say yes. Lucas pulled out his phone and typed a message to Jerry. "Can we talk tomorrow? I might have something important to discuss." Then, before he could second-guess himself, he texted Evelyn. "Let's talk details. I'm interested." The response was immediate. "Really? You're sure?" "I'm terrified, but I'm sure." "That's perfect. Terrified and sure is exactly how the best decisions feel." 3 months later, Lucas stood in the same Imperial ballroom where this whole journey had started. But this time, he wasn't an outsider in a borrowed suit, feeling invisible at the edges of the room. He was wearing clothes he'd bought himself, standing with confidence earned through hard work, surrounded by people he'd helped bring together. The Horizon Foundation's spring dinner had a different energy this year. The usual wealthy donors were present, but they'd been joined by teachers from public schools, administrators from community centers, students who'd benefited from foundation programs. The room was more diverse, more dynamic, more real than it had been 6 months ago. And it was Lucas who'd helped make that happen. His new role at Zenith, Director of Community Partnerships, had turned out to be exactly what Evelyn promised, and more challenging than he'd imagined. He'd spent the past 3 months learning to navigate corporate structures, building relationships with nonprofits and schools, translating between the tech world and the communities they served. It was exhausting and exhilarating, and sometimes he still felt like an imposter. But he was making a difference, real, measurable difference in ways that mattered. "Dad, Mrs. Chen is here!" Mia's voice cut through his thoughts. She was wearing a new dress, her hair carefully styled, looking older than 8 and still impossibly young. She'd thrived in the past few months, benefiting from the opportunities Lucas's new position provided, but still grounded by Thursday afternoons at their regular coffee shop and weekends at Mrs. Chen's learning Mandarin. Mrs. Chen appeared through the crowd, dressed elegantly and beaming with pride. "Lucas, you look wonderful. Like you finally realized you deserve to be in rooms like this. I'm still figuring that out, Lucas admitted, but I'm getting there. Jerry was there too, having been invited as Lucas's guest. He'd grumbled about putting on a suit, but secretly seemed pleased, especially after Lucas had helped connect Morrison's auto repair with Zenith's fleet maintenance contract. Their friendship had survived Lucas's departure, deepened even, built on mutual respect rather than just proximity. "This is weird," Jerry said, accepting a glass of wine from a passing server. "Fancy people everywhere, and I'm supposed to pretend I belong." "You do belong," Lucas said firmly. "We all do. That's the whole point." Evelyn found them before dinner service began. She looked radiant, confident in a way that would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. She'd been featured in 3 major publications since the tech conference, all of them highlighting her work in education rather than just her wealth. She'd hired a communications coach and was getting more comfortable with public speaking, though she'd told Lucas privately that she still got nervous before every presentation. "The seating chart has us at the same table," she said, smiling at their small group. "I pulled some strings." "Abuse of power," Jerry said, but he was grinning. "I approve." They made their way to their table, prominently placed, but not isolated the way Evelyn's VIP table had been last time. Around them sat a mix of donors and scholarship recipients, business leaders and teachers, wealth and service intermingled in ways the foundation was actively cultivating. It was messy and sometimes awkward, but it was real, and real was always better than perfect. Dr. Martinez was at their table too, already deep in conversation with a venture capitalist about funding for her immigrant education programs. She'd become a close partner in AdaptLearn's rollout, helping ensure the technology reached the students who needed it most. When she saw Lucas, she smiled warmly. "Lucas, I wanted to tell you, the first cohort of students using AdaptLearn is showing remarkable progress. The personalization is working exactly as Evelyn promised. We're seeing kids who were 2 years behind catching up in months." "That's incredible," Lucas said, feeling genuine pride. He'd helped facilitate that partnership, had sat through dozens of meetings making sure the implementation respected the communities being served. The evening proceeded with speeches and presentations, but the tone was different from the charity dinner 6 months ago. More collaborative, less performative. When Evelyn spoke, she was warm and engaging, telling stories about real students rather than just reciting statistics. When she acknowledged Lucas's work-building community partnerships, the applause was genuine. During dinner, between courses, Mia tugged on Lucas's sleeve. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always, kiddo." "Are you happy? Like, really happy? I know we moved and you changed jobs and everything's different, but is it good different?" Lucas looked at his daughter, at the concern and love in her 8-year-old face, and felt his heart swell. "Yeah, Mia, it's really good different. I miss some things about the garage, about our old routine, but this, getting to help people, working with Evelyn to build something meaningful, it feels right. Does it feel okay to you?" "It feels great," Mia said firmly. "You smile more now. And Evelyn's like family now. I like having family that's not just us." Across the table, Evelyn was watching them with an expression of such tenderness that Lucas had to look away before the emotion overwhelmed him. She'd become family in the truest sense, not through blood or obligation, but through choice and commitment and showing up even when it was hard. After dinner, as people mingled and the formal program gave way to networking, Richard, the man who'd challenged Evelyn at the first dinner, approached their table. "Ms. Zhao," he said, his tone respectful. "I wanted to apologize again for my behavior last fall. It was inappropriate and unfair, but I also wanted to thank you. The labor retraining programs Zenith has implemented, they're making a real difference. My nephew was one of the workers displaced by automation, and the coding boot camp you funded got him a new career. He's doing well, better than before, actually." Evelyn stood to shake his hand. "Thank you for telling me that. And thank you for the challenge. It pushed me to be better, to do better. Sometimes accountability looks like confrontation." "Maybe," Richard said. "But there are better ways to hold people accountable than public humiliation. I'm still learning that." He glanced at Lucas. "Your friend here taught me something important that night. about seeing people as human first, everything else second. That stayed with me. After Richard moved on, Evelyn sat back down with a small smile. 6 months ago, I would have avoided him all night, too anxious about the confrontation, too worried about saying the wrong thing. And now? Lucas asked. Now I realize that most people are just trying their best. Even when they stumble, even when they mess up, if they're willing to learn and grow, there's room for connection. She looked at Lucas meaningfully. You taught me that, you and Mia. You saw past my mistakes to who I was trying to be. You did the same for us, Lucas said. You saw a mechanic and his daughter and decided we were worth your time, worth your friendship. That changed everything. The evening wound down eventually, people beginning to gather coats and say goodbyes. Lucas found himself standing by the same windows where he'd watched Evelyn sit alone 6 months ago, isolated and struggling. The city lights spread before him, the same view transformed by context and understanding. Jerry joined him, loosening his tie with visible relief. You did good, Reed. Really good. This whole thing you've built, the partnerships, the community connections, helping Evelyn find her voice, it matters. I'm proud of you. Coming from Jerry, who expressed emotion about as often as he gave away free oil changes, the words landed with weight. Thanks, Jerry. That means a lot. You know what the weird thing is? I thought you leaving the garage would be the end of our friendship. Like we only connected because we worked together. But you've been around more in the past 3 months than before. Showing up to help when we're swamped, grabbing beers after work, introducing me to people who've helped the business. You didn't abandon us when you moved up. You brought us with you. Your family, Lucas said simply. Success doesn't mean leaving behind the people who mattered when things were hard. Mrs. Chen appeared with Mia, who was drooping with exhaustion. I think someone needs to go home, she said gently. Lucas scooped up his daughter, who immediately rested her head on his shoulder. Yeah, it's been a long day. Evelyn found them at the exit, Mia already half asleep. Thank you for being here tonight, she said quietly, for helping make this room feel like a place where everyone belongs. That's what community is supposed to be, Lucas said. Not perfect, not always comfortable, but inclusive, real. You helped build that as much as I did. We built it together, Evelyn corrected. You, me, Mia, Mrs. Chen, Jerry, all the people we've connected over these months. That's what I've learned. Nothing meaningful gets built alone. They stood there for a moment, the four of them, Lucas holding Mia, Mrs. Chen, and Evelyn beside them, and Lucas felt the rightness of it settle into his bones. The strange, unlikely family they'd built from loneliness and courage, and the simple decision to reach across divides that seemed unbridgeable. 6 months ago, he'd been invisible in this building, an outsider who didn't belong, who couldn't imagine deserving a seat at tables like these. But somewhere between that night and this one, between standing up for a stranger and accepting her friendship in return, Lucas had learned something vital. Belonging isn't something you're granted by others. It's something you claim for yourself by being brave enough to show up, to speak your truth, to build bridges instead of accepting walls. Evelyn had needed to learn that she deserved connection despite her differences. Lucas had needed to learn that his worth wasn't determined by his job title or his bank account. And together, they taught each other that the most powerful thing any person can do is see another human being and choose kindness over judgment. It was a simple lesson. Almost absurdly simple, but it had changed everything. As they walked out into the night, Lucas carrying Mia, Mrs. Chen and Evelyn chatting beside them, Jerry trailing behind with his customary grumbling, Lucas realized that this was what happiness looked like. Not perfection, not the absence of struggle, but community built through courage and maintained through choice. The charity dinner where their story began was long over. But the connections they'd forged that night, the friendships they'd built in the months since, the community they'd created by refusing to accept isolation as inevitable, those would last. Not because they were easy, not because they made perfect sense on paper, but because they'd chosen each other across every divide that should have kept them apart. And that choice, renewed every day through small acts of showing up and speaking truth and seeing each other fully, was the most powerful force Lucas had ever known. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything that mattered. And as they stepped into the city night together, Lucas felt something he hadn't felt since Sarah died. The certainty that his life was exactly where it needed to be. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Because it was built on connection rather than isolation, on courage rather than fear, on the simple truth that everyone deserves to be seen and valued for exactly who they are. The outsiders had found each other, had built belonging from scratch, had proven that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is reach across impossible distance and say, I see you, you matter, let's build something beautiful together. And they had. They really, truly had.